This is the story of someone who lived for the clan. Those were the words his father always said. Now, in the middle of a battlefield, he remembered that all he was meant to be was his brother's shadow. As he knelt, someone walked near him, commenting on the priceless view. The young man, apparently exhausted after an intense fight. The video of an arrogant man now fighting the most powerful commander on the continent. From what could be seen around, amidst so many fallen soldiers, the battle had been fierce. And now, that man was walking toward him, saying that it was expected from the brother of that man. Indeed, very interesting. Cyan Vert was cornered by the soldiers who still stood and by the man who considered himself the strongest commander. Boris bore a presumptuous expression and a gaze that belittled the enemy, as if imagining him inferior. Imagining that this commander could not have acted on his own, Cyan wondered who might have forced him into such an act. He even considered it might have been the Emperor's doing as he tried to understand the situation. Then, he unleashed a demonic aura, causing Boris to cover his face in disgust, muttering that the rumors were true. The young man, called the Mist Assassin, released his full aura and killing intent. The commander, so sure of his own strengths, claimed he would write a report after eliminating him. Cyan had no intention of being defeated, so the commander could write his report, if he still lived. Aware of his rival's power, the commander announced that he had created a 9-star barrier, so using a secret power would be futile. All Cyan needed to do was escape that situation and reveal the true culprit to his brother. With true determination in his eyes, he revealed to his opponent that a barrier was easy to destroy. His heart broke in countless ways when he heard the voice of that man in golden armor, ordering him to cease the attack could not, by any means, confront that commander. Now, the one who lived for the clan, always hearing his father's words, that his brother was the clan's extension. The man before him would share all the glory and success with him, the Vert brothers united in battle. Disappointment was clear on his battered face. He had found the true culprit, and to his disbelief, it was Askel. The commander stood in place, merely saluting the blond man in golden armor who approached. The weight of the discovery was too much for Cyan Vert, who was once again on his knees with his sword in hand. To make matters worse, he still had to endure his brother's sarcasm, asking if he was confused. Even in such a dire situation, his powerful demonic aura did not dissipate easily. The naive and deceived younger brother asked what it all meant, his gaze pleading for an answer. Askel did not hide his intentions and said that since Cyan had fulfilled his duty for the clan, and even for him. Even hearing those words, Cyan could not believe that after living a life in someone else's shadow, he was now being betrayed in such a way. After being used by the clan and his brother, he was being discarded. Cyan could not understand. He did not know what he had done wrong. It was then that his brother revealed that Cyan had done nothing wrong. It was that killing aura he possessed. Askel could not even call him human, yet his intentions prevailed. Angry, Askel said Cyan had deceived everyone for too long, and now claimed ignorance of his sins. Confused, Cyan still refused to accept being called a murderer and having sins fabricated against him. Slowly, he came to understand that he had been betrayed by his family, used, and was now being discarded. All this was the result of the struggle for succession in the Empire. There was also the rivalry against the demonic army, and the great war to unify the continent. All of this had been achieved thanks to Cyan's efforts. In that moment of fury, he remembered he had done all of this solely because he dedicated his life to serving his brother. But after getting everything he wanted and no longer seeing use for his brother, Askel was abandoning him. 20 years of his life had been taken, spent solely serving someone else, never once considering himself. Wounded in both body and soul, with emotional scars, he said it didn't matter if this body broke apart. He wanted to show his potential, giving everything he had in that moment, if it meant destroying Askel. The soldiers around, witnessing the explosion of mana, thought it impossible for this to come from a human. Cyan Vert declared how foolish his brother was. The hero was trying to kill his younger brother out of fear. Askel, hearing the words of that bastard, became so enraged that his veins were visibly prominent. As he had promised to give his all, the young man threw himself into a true battle. Amidst the fierce fight, with shattered emotions, he imagined that if he could land just one hit on a weak point that couldn't regenerate, it would be enough, but he was weakened from previous battles. While his brother preserved his full power and let him strike, the fight was also unfair. Boris was assisting Askel with the shield he had previously mentioned, making things much harder. Having missed that chance, Cyan was easily struck by Askel, who found an opening in his guard. At that moment, his dagger fell to the ground, yet it still radiated immense power. Piercing his brother with his sword, Askel told him he wanted to grant him a painless death since they were brothers. But everything changed when he revealed his true nature. Still, make no mistake, he had always known what he was. Looking into his eyes, Askel said it was good he had never trusted him. After pulling out his sword, he kicked the weakened young man. turning his back on him and leaving him as if he were trash. He merely called for his commander to leave. Cyan, seeing himself defeated, lay on the ground, his strength slowly draining away. Near the end, he began questioning the life he hadn't lived for himself, one spent merely following his father's words. His eyes were almost closing, and everything would end in regret. Then he decided to act. He rushed after his brother at great speed to catch him off guard, and while he was still wounded, Asuko could hardly believe it when he saw Cyan charging toward him with genuine intent to finish him. Those were eyes filled only with hatred, and his roar was that of a beast. With his dagger near his brother's neck, he hoped for a single chance to repay him for all he had endured. However, a single blow from Asuko was enough to hurl everything around them into a blinding light. In some place, Cyan woke up to someone calling his name, agitated and drenched in sweat. As he lay in that state, a maid entered and asked how long he would remain like that. When he looked at her after hearing her voice, he asked why she was there, which left her startled. He widened his eyes in shock. It didn't seem to make sense for Emily to be standing before him. After 20 years, it was enough to leave Cyan perplexed. Yet she looked the same as the last time he saw her. The surroundings were also familiar. It was the same room he had used when he was younger. Even the furniture was unchanged. Faced with this situation, he placed his hand on his face, wondering if he had returned to being a child. The maid insisted on calling him to carry out his duties. She asked if he wasn't going to train and urged him to get dressed and join her. He had barely opened his eyes, still trying to adjust to this reality, and he was already expected to train. Seeking more clarity, he asked the maid Emily what training she was referring to. It became apparent that the Vert Duchy was similar to how it had been in the past. This could mean he had traveled back in time. Believing he had died, he wondered if this was what people described as life flashing before their eyes. He recalled 27 years ago, in the year 985. It was March 1st, a year before he entered the academy. Every year, the duchy held a training session, which was considered a major event, as the Duke Vert made a point of attending. He would face Krantz Vert as his opponent in that situation. Krantz was the same age as Cyan, and they were brothers. Krantz's mother was Duchess Margaret Erzith, and thanks to her, Krantz received much more attention, despite both being young. Cyan was an illegitimate child, and after being defeated in that fight, he became a laughingstock. The duel was also the reason his father turned his back on him, ceasing to pay him any attention. Strangely, the maid Emily tried to persuade him to forego the duel, yet Cyan felt confident. With his current body, even a rapier felt too heavy, as his strength matched his age. Upon holding a sword again, even a simple one, he was overcome by a strange sensation. It didn't feel like light flashing before his eyes, and he had never encountered a spell capable of creating such an illusion. This strongly indicated that he had indeed traveled back to the past, standing face to face with his opponent as the duel began. He believed that somehow, he could change future events. The Duke had given his consent for the duel to commence. His opponent made the first move, appearing eager to finish quickly. He also wondered where Cyan was looking. He raised his sword and gazed at the young man as if he were tracing his entire presence. Cyan, noticing the sluggishness of his opponent's attack and strike, thought he was nothing more than a snail. He simply changed the trajectory of his feet, and that small move was enough to astonish his opponent. With that slight adjustment, he completely altered the trajectory of the enemy's attack. The enemy glared in anger, asking if he had started dodging like a coward. When he attempted another attack, now shrouded in insecurity, Cyan easily evaded and caused his opponent to drop his sword. Thinking it wasn't enough, Cyan delivered a kick below the knee, a small act, but for young Krantz, it was devastating. After receiving the kick, Krantz showed immense pain, rolling on the ground in agony. The Duke displayed a reaction, something akin to an analytical observation, while the boy's mother screamed. According to the duel's rules, Cyan only needed to place his sword at his opponent's neck to claim victory. But for Cyan, this didn't seem sufficient. He gripped his sword tightly, even more so as he remembered that, at that same age, the boy on the ground had constantly mistreated him. That childish behavior had persisted even when Cyan entered the academy. The harassment was routine. It was necessary to teach him a lesson so he would never attempt such actions again, even in this lifetime. Determined to forge his own path, Cyan decided to deliver a few more kicks, thus claiming victory after his opponent suffered a humiliating defeat. After the duel, things changed quickly. The Duke wanted to see him, and even cleared space in his schedule. He even assigned a high-ranking knight, Yoken, directly affiliated with the Duke, to escort him. Now under escort, Cyan encountered the Duchess in the corridor, her anger clearly visible. Realizing they seemed to be discussing her son, Cyan felt drained but seized the chance to insult her. When he asked about Krantz's condition, the Duchess was indignant at the young man's audacity. She turned away only when Cyan remarked that duels were like that, which only fueled her indignation further. It was then that she declared bastards shouldn't be treated like legitimate children. Expressing her deep disdain, she said he was just like his mother, all because she was a harlot. She pointed out that his place was on the streets, begging for food, and he should never dare to pick a fight. Cyan's eyes quickly darkened with malice. He thought she had crossed the line and briefly considered finishing her off. Destroying the Duchess crossed his mind momentarily, but he quickly dismissed the thought. He knew there was a way to make her suffer more effectively, and decided to take his time. He began his mission by asking if she knew Krantz would also be enrolling in the academy. Cyan politely suggested she might be worried, given that her son needed to graduate. With an intimidating gaze, she bared her intentions, grinding her teeth at him. The Duchess even raised her hand, considering teaching the boy in front of her a lesson. In a protective gesture, the Duke's personal guard intervened, placing his hand to prevent any harm. He informed the Duchess that the Duke was waiting for the boy and that they couldn't afford to be late. The knight, with his imposing demeanor, made it clear that her word would always come after the Duke's orders. Realizing her place and knowing she couldn't defy a direct order from the Duke, the Duchess fell silent. The young master, standing behind the knight, mocked the Duchess, knowing the Duke's word was absolute. He noticed that a knight had been assigned for his protection, and could hardly believe there was someone unafraid to defy her. After knocking on the Duke's office door and announcing his entry, Cyan Vert, the youngest son, stepped inside. As he greeted his father, he remembered it had been over 15 years since they last saw each other. A man with a commanding presence and blonde hair stood before him, Duke Wallace Vert, the commander of Velhas, a state in the western part of the Yuzif Empire. Known as the protector of the continent, he was the hero who resisted the invasion of a demonic tribe. With his exceptional magical power and military strategies, he bore burdens no one else dared to shoulder. He shone brightly until the demonic army claimed his life. In his lifetime, he fought for the peace of the continent. However, these were merely memories. Cyan believed the Duke was a man who, by his own will, chose to dedicate his entire life to serving the people. Undoubtedly, an admirable man. After asking his son to sit and taking a seat across from him, the Duke got straight to the point, stating that Cyan had faltered after seeing the sword. That statement put the young man on the defensive, unsure of what the Duke expected of him. It was then that his father clarified he was referring to the moment his opponent approached him. During the duel, it was noted that Cyan saw the sword's trajectory and turned to dodge it. The Duke, on his part, confronted the young man, wanting to know where he had learned swordsmanship. The son realized that, as expected, the Duke was perceptive and responded by saying he had practiced alone on several nights. However, his father was no fool and knew perfectly well that Cyan had no interest in swordsmanship. When confronted about why he had hidden his skills, Cyan remarked that he didn't want to stand out. Despite himself, the son managed to earn his father's admiration by winning the duel against his brother, Krantz. However, the question arose about whether all that had truly been necessary. The son knew the Duke's sharp questions were a sign that he recognized his strength. With this in mind, Cyan replied that he simply wanted to prove something. His father wanted to know what that might be. Cyan explained that even though they were brothers, he was better than Krantz, which revealed the true meaning of the duel. His father, the Duke, found that answer remarkable for its clarity and directness. The Duke admitted he hadn't realized how talented his son could be, and that revelation pleased him. He added that one day he hoped Cyan would become as strong as Askel. Just as everything seemed to be going well, Cyan was suddenly reminded of old memories when Askel, his father's favorite son, was the one who took his last breath. He realized nothing had changed. His father's obsession with his older brother remained. This plunged Cyan into dark emotions. The Duke continued, stating that even though this occasion wasn't a reward ceremony, his son now had the opportunity to make a request, which he would grant. Hearing he had the chance to disrupt everything his father's cherished son aspired to build, Cyan didn't hesitate to state his desire. He wanted to go to the front lines. Hearing this, Emily was shocked. Back in his quarters, his loyal maid scolded him, thinking he had gone mad. She explained that the front lines were a horrible place, full of brutal and terrifying beasts, true demonic creatures. This was because, in the western region of the Yuzif Empire, in Velias, there was only one place called the front lines. It was a battlefield where relentless wars and bestial confrontations had been happening for centuries. Cyan knew this was why his father had remained neutral from the start. However, after one condition, he would need to prove himself qualified enough to go to the front lines, though Cyan wasn't entirely sure what that meant. At that moment, he only wished to grow stronger as quickly as possible since he felt weak compared to others. He was fortunate still to have his battle instincts after returning and could sense a small amount of demonic power. If he trained his body extensively, he could fully utilize it. With that in mind, he decided to begin his training. While still speaking with Emily, someone called his name and opened the door. Entering casually was Miss Alice, his sister, with a distinctly unfriendly expression. She had discovered his plan, grabbed his collar, and shook him violently. Despite the maid's attempt to change the subject by asking how Miss Alice had been, she didn't stop shaking him and kept asking if he had gone mad. She had heard that he wanted to go to the front lines. When her brother asked her to let go, she did, but she thought he was incredibly arrogant. She believed that after defeating their half-brother, Krantz, the boy had changed. This was disappointing. She called him to follow her to the rooftop, and once they were there, she announced they would begin as soon as he chose a sword. She said she would allow him to go to the front lines if he could endure 3 minutes of her attacks. Alice then asked, regardless of how strange it sounded, if he planned to become the family's successor. Uninterested, as he had no desire to inherit the family legacy. Cyan saw Alice draw her sword and asked him to take one as well. He thought she wanted a duel, even though it hadn't been half a day since he had fought his other brother. Seeing her quickly charge toward him, he thought it was tiresome to have to do this again. However, at some point, he had forgotten how fast she was and had to act just as quickly. His past life's instincts were always there, aiding him in moments of need. Alice could hardly believe a 10-year-old boy could defend himself against such a powerful attack from her. Cyan noticed her intent to fight fiercely against her brother, who was 7 years younger. For her, it wasn't a game. She took every movement, every strike, very seriously. She thought about how her brother had defended a long sword with precision using only a rapier. Despite her earlier anger, she smiled, thinking it might have been just luck. His instincts were better than she had anticipated. Seeing her determination, Cyan knew he was in serious trouble. If the fight lasted too long, something would go wrong. She charged forward with a ferocious strike. Her blows were always intense. This time, Cyan managed to block using his instincts and skills from another life. Even so, he appeared to be struggling significantly to keep up with her, and all of this only made her increasingly frustrated. Miss Alice, Cyan's older sister, was letting herself be carried away by the emotion of the battle. Gradually, Cyan realized that much more strength would be needed than she currently had to overpower him. Still, he resolved to do his best to continue the fight. However, if his plans failed, he would be left vulnerable after taking a hit. With a powerful strike from his sister, he leapt backward, managing only to balance himself on a pillar. He thought it could have gone terribly wrong. If he hadn't stopped his sword in time, he might have fatally struck his sister. This was because the missed swordsmanship technique aimed to eliminate opponents quickly. In his current state, fighting without eliminating someone was difficult. He lacked the strength to suppress that instinct. He wondered how much time was left, compensating for his lack of strength with mana, but he was nearing his limit. Alice, his older sister, wasn't at full strength either, but she was already summoning even greater power. Cyan quickly realized it was 6-star magic. In his current state, he couldn't stop an attack like that. Her sword began emanating a blue light, known as the Water Blade. Seeing the power of the strike, he recognized her intent to finish him off quickly. By looking into her eyes, Cyan could tell everything was over. He knew he would fall from the castle even if he managed to block the strike. His only option was to trust in another plan. Leaping from the pillar, and using it for momentum, he launched himself forward to intercept his sister's attack. In his mind, his thoughts fluctuated, praying that someone would intervene quickly, or it would all be lost. Alice prepared her strike and launched it. Fortunately, what Cyan hoped for happened. Yolkin appeared and deflected the attack. Drawing his sword, Yolkin skillfully wielded it in one hand while catching the young master with the other. He managed to repel the attack away. However, looking at Miss Alice, he told her she was going too far. He reminded her that she was fighting someone much younger than herself. As Cyan was lifted, he thought to himself how long it had taken for the knight to appear. When his sister finally came to her senses, she took Cyan from the knight's arms, hugged him tightly, and apologized. She admitted she had lost her head for a moment. Crying, she confessed that she had done all of this to stop him from going to the battlefield. She explained that her obsession with preventing him had blinded her to the consequences. To him, this behavior was typical of her. His sister belonged to the elite and excelled in everything, from swordsmanship to magic and other studies, earning top marks. With her rare beauty, everyone called her a child of God. Since a young age, she had trained in swordsmanship. She had been hailed as a future guardian of the continent, along with their older brother, Askelvert. However, not long after joining the Knights of Light, she was killed. Now, all Cyan felt was a tightness in his chest. He had missed her so much that this time, he promised himself he would protect his sister Alice. But his strength gave out. Alice found it strange and confronted the knight, questioning how he, a guard of the Duke, could leave for battle like that. The knight explained he was protecting the young master under orders. Although he couldn't reveal the details to Miss Alice as it was a secret, Cyan had already sensed his presence since leaving the Duke's office. Exhausted, Cyan wondered why his father had told him to secretly endure 2 grueling battles in a single day. He fell asleep in his sister's arms, Moved, she realized he was still just a child. After Alice returned to the academy the next day, it became clear she had only come back to see their father before her graduation. After the duels, Cyan felt the need to grow stronger, and began training his body over the last 2 weeks. However, he was stuck at just 10 push-ups, the maximum he could manage. He felt frustrated because he once relied on his strength, but now he was weak and frail. Emily, his trusted maid, informed him that a package had arrived sent by Miss Alice. However, the maid found the smell unpleasant. Cyan assumed it was the blood of an infernal hound he had asked his sister to procure. It was an item that could only be obtained in the Lemia Valley, yet she managed to buy it on the black market. Due to its overwhelming stench, demon beast blood was considered poisonous. Aside from the burning sensation when consumed, it was rumored to permanently increase mana and strength. However, most people dismissed this as mere speculation. Cyan knew it was real because of his past life. The maid tried to dissuade him from drinking it, but he thought she shouldn't worry since he was the only one capable of adapting to her terrible cooking. He still remembered with disgust the time she made mushroom soup. His heart nearly stopped after tasting it. In comparison, this was nothing, so he drank it. Seconds later, he told Emily he was going for a walk, thinking he needed to confirm if it really worked. He ran to a place he hadn't visited in a long time, something he had been looking forward to for the past 2 weeks. It was the moment Yolkin wouldn't be around, busy with his regular reports. Cyan frequented this spot whenever he wanted to be alone. It was also where Asko received the divine revelation. While he didn't fully believe the story, the place had a concentrated mana flow, making the divine revelation plausible. After touching a specific spot on the ground, he felt very satisfied. Only he knew about this story. He focused his mana flow on the power within the ground. Satisfied, he knew his brother couldn't even imagine what he was doing. With all he had done, he ended up opening a pathway to somewhere, and now needed to follow it. As he descended the stairs, he noticed this time felt different from the last time he had been there. It was an ancient temple dedicated to the god of light, Lumindal, until the history of this land was erased. This happened due to the demon god of war, who appeared 300 years ago. Who could imagine such a place existed in the mountains right behind the castle? The sword at the end of the staircase shone so brightly that it lit the way. In the year 999 before the Foundation, humanity finally defeated the demonic army in Velias. Although the demonic army was powerful, humans discovered ancient relics called divine weapons. One such relic was the sacred sword blessed by the god of light. It was the main reason humanity triumphed over the demons. Consequently, it was also the reason for Cyan's death, as that sword would belong to Askelvert. Cyan thought the Duran Dark Sword might be related to his regression. He touched the sword, hoping something would happen, but nothing did. Frustrated, he decided to kick the enormous glowing sword floating above its resting place. All of it had put him in a bad mood. Now he had to focus on why he had come here, but the sword behind him wasn't pleased either. He knew that when light passed through, there was a shadow that seemed otherworldly. At first glance, one might think it was merely the shadow of the first sword. However, it wasn't the shadow of the sword but another sword. Where there was light, shadows also existed. And this was a path leading to another room hidden by the altar of light. He entered cautiously, and from afar he saw the sword that had belonged to him in another life. It was comforting to see it again. Approaching it, he took his demonic sword Kirim into his hands. He greeted it with a good morning, and asked if it still hadn't awakened. He was thrilled to see it again, the feeling stirring his heart with a desire to destroy something. However, the sword didn't recognize him and asked if he wasn't afraid. With a chilling voice that would terrify anyone unfamiliar with it, the sword asked if he understood the meaning of awakening it. Unconcerned, he said he didn't care because the sword belonged to him. The malevolent shadow warned him that once awakened, a demonic sword left no room for regret. Revealing its fangs and glowing eyes, the shadow, now called Quantum Malevolent, smirked and claimed his body now belonged to the sword. Cyan wasn't new to this situation. He grabbed the shadow's neck, demanding its obedience. In response, the shadow transformed into a human-like figure, and Cyan remarked that it hadn't been like this before. The shadow grew enraged and demanded to know how he managed to touch it again. He simply replied that the sword was his. Now the sword, in the form of a person, extended her enormous, rose-colored claws, attempting to attack him. However, he anticipated her intent and dodged, taking the opportunity to strike her as well. In the form of a woman, she was enraged, demanding to know who dared not only awaken her but provoke her as well. She wanted to know if he was the successor because she could sense Eru's aura. The young man admitted he was the successor, smiling, and informed the sword that her master had returned. He then commanded the demonic sword Kirim to kneel. She was reluctant, as he appeared to be just a child. She could not accept him without first fighting. Seeing her fighting fiercely, he realized words would not suffice. The purpose of the demonic sword was to dominate its wielder. Faced with this fact, he had no other choice. He decided to go easy on her by using the demonic sword's control technique. Immediately, it brought her to her knees. He told her he would say it only once more. He demanded to know why she refused to accept him as her master while he was still being kind. She only wanted to understand how he could use the control technique in such a childish form. So, he resolved to use it several more times. By the time he stopped, the sword's head was buried in the ground. At last, she said she accepted him. However, she didn't call him master, but instead referred to him as human. Only when she respectfully called him master did he cease using the demonic sword's control. He decided it was time to return, having accomplished his purpose there. He also realized he had been gone for quite a while. The sword mentioned it had been a long time since she had breathed fresh air. Suddenly, she transformed into a black orb, with pink hair and sharp teeth, exclaiming how refreshing it felt. Hiding behind the boy, she asked him for the name of her master. She still doubted that Ero had truly chosen a child like him. Without much explanation, he told her it had happened in a past life. When she asked what he meant, he revealed that he had died once. This intrigued her about the nature of their conversation. When the boy approached the golden sword again, Kirim asked if the spirit of that sword was still asleep. He replied that it would take another 20 years for its master to appear. She found his words odd, as if he knew the future. Holding his sword, he swung it and severed the hilt of the other. Kirim was horrified when she saw him take a piece of the sword's hilt. She asked what he intended to do with it. Smiling, he replied that it would make things more interesting in the future. The sun was still rising, and a carriage could already be seen. It gradually slowed down until it came to a complete stop. From it stepped Cyan Vert. Barely able to believe the big day had arrived, clad in his silver armor, he greeted the Duke. The Duke, with a serious tone, revealed that he would ask one last time if Cyan was certain about wanting to stay at the front lines. If the boy wanted to change his mind, the Duke wouldn't stop him. However, Cyan declared that his heart was already set on that place. Faced with such determination, the Duke instructed his trusted knight to open the scroll he held in his hands. As he spoke, it was clear they were about to perform a summoning. Once the scroll was opened, the summoning began, and when it was complete, a beast engulfed in flames emerged. A large creature now stood face to face with the protagonist. Quickly assessing the situation, he realized it was a low-ranking demon beast from the Lemia Valley. He noted their effort in setting up the test. He also observed that everyone present was prepared in case something went wrong. From their stances, he could tell the knights were ready to intervene if things became too dangerous. His father warned him to take responsibility for every action and to prove his resolve. The knight trusted that the young master was adequately prepared for the test, and a memory came to mind. Gripping his sword, Yoken recalled the day the young master had asked him for a duel. Claiming there were 3 days left until the deadline for his promise to his father, Cyan said he couldn't waste time without practical experience. He felt he needed to experience real battle as well and asked for Yoken's help. The knight suggested he duel someone his own age, like young Master Krantz. Cyan explained that for some reason, Krantz always ran away whenever he got close. The knight found this quite troublesome and told the boy that if he insisted, Yoken would duel him. However, Yoken would fight using only the scabbard, focusing solely on defense, leaving Cyan free to attack however he wished. The young man expressed his gratitude to the knight, who was also his mentor, and mentioned he wanted another favor. With a more serious expression, he requested that whatever happened there not be reported to his father. In a firm tone, he said it was an order, leaving Yoken intrigued about what might come next. After issuing that command, Cyan immediately charged at the knight. Using a simple sword, while the knight wielded only the scabbard, the battle was still engaging. Yoken noticed that Cyan's attack was strong, far beyond what one would expect from a 10-year-old boy's sword. He also observed Cyan's speed, as the boy moved fluidly and strategically. At one point, the knight could barely track the boy's movement as he attempted to catch him off guard with an attack from behind. Being experienced in battle, Yoken sensed Cyan's presence in time to defend against the strike. Cyan followed up with several other blows and fencing maneuvers, showing that he was fully committed and not holding back against the knight. Yoken found it challenging to keep up with the boy's movements, but noted that Cyan wasn't yet fully prepared. Realizing he still needed more training, the knight praised him for his excellent effort. Yoken, initially surprised by the command and the intensity of the duel, acknowledged the boy's determination as he caught his breath. The duel, though short, was intense and revealed that the young master was no longer a fragile child. Yoken saw Cyan's growth in a positive light and thought that, if his instincts were correct, the young master could already face any challenge that came his way. Such a challenge soon presented itself as a ferocious beast. Cyan focused intently as the demon hound vanished in an instant to launch its attack. Not entirely unprepared, Cyan managed to land a blow to the beast's eye. he followed up with additional strikes to drive the beast back and put some distance between them. He knew that with his current strength, he couldn't sustain a prolonged fight against such a formidable monster, and needed to end the battle quickly. Positioning himself carefully, he aimed to finish the beast with his next strike. He delivered a precise blow to the creature's neck, aiming for a swift and efficient kill. Then, launching himself forward, he drove his sword into the beast's skull, eliciting a thunderous roar. Everything went as planned, leaving the observing soldiers impressed by his skill. The performance was so remarkable that it drew a satisfied smile from the Duke's face. Standing near the fallen beast, Cyan noticed enough fluid pooling around it to fill several bottles. He thought to himself that doing something like this could easily make him seem insane. He dismissed the thought when he heard clapping from his father, accompanied by praise. Expressing his satisfaction, the Duke told Cyan he would see him on the front lines. Cyan quickly and respectfully thanked his father, who left noticeably pleased. However, a wisp of black and purple smoke appeared on Cyan's shoulder, addressing him as Master. In seconds, the smoke formed into a black orb with pink hair, angrily asking if he thought she resembled a kitchen knife. Somewhat bored by her questions, Cyan replied that he didn't see her that way because he knew she was a demonic sword. She challenged him, asking why he hadn't used her, especially since he needed the fluid to gain strength. The next beast approached and stuck out its tongue, asking for just a taste. Cyan assured her that she didn't need to worry. Soon, she would have as much as she wanted. It was only a matter of time. Even so, she continued questioning him, frustrated that she hadn't been awakened for that moment. Terrified screams came from the northwest as ogres appeared. Bells rang to signal the construction of defenses. The order was clear. None of the ogres were to escape. They were to be exterminated swiftly. Soldiers shouted commands to begin containment efforts, their excitement evident. A bright golden light illuminated the sky. Even as the other giants roared angrily at the light, they could do nothing. Golden chains began emerging, binding the creatures in place. The command was to attack while the ogres were restrained, taking advantage of the moment to strike. Following the order, the knights launched attacks on as many of the giants as they could. Chaos engulfed the battlefield as they worked to subdue the ogres before they could reach the camp. From atop a horse, maintaining a calm demeanor, was the Duke's son, accompanied by Emily. Emily, horrified by the scene, cried and screamed for her young master. At first, Cyan ignored her, overcome by the nostalgia of being in that place once again. Soon, his father appeared, asking how it felt to be at the front lines. Cyan responded, though he seemed a bit nervous. The Duke warned him that, as he could see, at any moment, that place could be the last sight anyone ever witnessed. He also advised him never to let his guard down. Cyan, satisfied with the advice, assured his father he would keep it all in mind. However, he knew that situations like these were common on the front lines, usually occurring 3 to 4 times a day. Each battle had its specific details, with capable knights as the foundation. They dealt with all the monsters attempting to cross the front lines, and everyone there was highly disciplined. When Cyan saw the tent where he would stay in the surrounding area, he thought it was very secure. With so many disciplined bodyguards protecting him, he wondered if he would even be able to feed the sword. He wasn't sure if he would have to wait until dinner, but then he noticed Emily trembling under the covers. When he asked what she was doing, she said she was scared by the Duke's words. The idea that anything could strike at any moment made her extremely nervous. In a cold tone, Cyan asked why she didn't just go back. Angrily, she replied that she couldn't leave him under any circumstances, especially with monsters everywhere. If she left, who would take care of the young master? Frustrated, she stormed out of the tent, telling him not to take too long because it was already time for dinner. Cyan then asked Emily where the cape he had requested was, but she ignored him. Annoyed to see her leave without answering, he considered following her. After crafting a doll resembling himself, he placed it in his bed and covered it, thinking it would suffice. As he was about to leave, he heard Emily's voice asking if he was going out again to train. He confirmed and asked if she had just woken up. She commented that he was very responsible and that his father would be proud. He told her he was leaving and instructed her to take care of things as she usually did. And of course, if anyone asked, she should say he was sleeping. Cyan knew that because this was the front line, night guards were typically reinforced. Without delay, he slipped away as quickly as possible. He knew if he didn't move fast, he could easily be caught. Reaching a safe spot, he began training. It was the third movement of the dense mist technique. Declining mist was the name of this move, and he remembered it well. He also knew there were many monsters in the area. It was the perfect place for Karim to feed. Calling her, she immediately seemed satisfied with the scent in the air. She told him she couldn't hold back any longer. She requested permission to cut something, referring to the beasts approaching them. Permission was granted. Cyan told her they would do things her way. Together, they began facing the monsters, this time using specific techniques. Mist sword combined with advancing stormy fog. seemed like the perfect technique for the moment. Surrounded by several wild beasts, they fought intensely. Cyan eventually pierced the neck of one beast with a piece of bamboo, attached to which was a cup. After collecting enough liquid, he began drinking it fresh. Wiping the residue from his mouth, he smiled. He thought the taste was quite delicious. The sword, too, was satisfied. For the first time since awakening, she felt truly well. Cyan told her they would continue training. Kirim asked how long he thought it would take to grow strong. By destroying beasts like these. With a carefree smile, he replied that the night had just begun. He remembered that this place was full of monsters, which left her excited. Elsewhere, not too far away, a carriage escorted by several heavily armed guards was passing through the mountains. Inside, a girl with a sad expression could be seen. Someone mentioned how dangerous the front lines could be and suggested they could turn back if she wished. The young lady in the carriage told her tutor not to treat her like a child. In a more serious tone, she declared that she was the Empire's royal princess and had faced danger before. Bound by duty to help her father, she stated firmly that she would be irritated if her tutor brought it up again. In an attempt to change the subject and lighten the mood, the tutor mentioned that the youngest son of the Vert family was also on the front lines. She added that he should be about the same age as the princess. Curious, the princess asked why the duke would bring his youngest son to the front lines. Her tutor explained that the boy had come of his own will and suggested the princess try to befriend him. However, the princess showed no interest in such trivial matters and ended the conversation by saying she would sleep. The lady accompanying the princess understood and agreed to remain quiet so the princess could have some peace. Yet, the princess decided to continue the dialogue and asked her trusted lady what his name was. The lady, pleased to see the princess continue the conversation, told her the boy's name was Cyan Vert. The princess asked again, wanting to confirm the name she had just heard. Afterward, she repeated the boy's name aloud as if trying to commit it to memory. Demonic creatures, such as giant birds, were being eliminated for the safety of the camp. The Duke called out for checks to ensure no one was injured. It was reported back to him that everyone was safe. The battlefield was intense that day. However, the Duke observed something noteworthy. He saw that the last giant bird had been taken down by his son, Cyan Vert, who was already assuming a commanding stance. Once again, the Duke asked how his son was finding life on the front lines. Confident, Cyan replied that he was learning something new every day. However, his father thought he might want to return home. Noticing that his son had endured for quite some time, the Duke expressed pride in him. Such an attitude was unimaginable, let alone believable that it was happening in reality. The Duke also mentioned that he had something to discuss with Cyan the following morning and asked him to come to his cabin early. This surprised Cyan greatly, as he had never seen his father so kind toward him before. However, when night fell and everyone was resting, Cyan began his training once more. This time, he was taken by surprise as a creature emerged from the ground. He quickly identified it as a death worm. However, such creatures were only supposed to appear in the deeper parts of the valley. Kirim offered to help, asking if he was having difficulty. If so, she could handle the situation. Cyan hesitated, fearing she might use this opportunity to take over his body. Kirim assured him that she would only stay in control long enough to defeat the creature, and then return control as usual. She asked him to observe the fissures created by the sword, explaining that the creature regenerated instantly. Continuing to attack it would be futile as the monster could heal itself immediately. Cyan knew she was right. This battle could last forever, as it had already been a month since his arrival at the front lines. He had consumed the fluids of countless demonic beasts, but still felt it wasn't enough. With no other choice, he decided to agree to her plan. Kirim, now permitted to take over, immediately used the intense mist of the ninth form. This technique, a manifestation of the demonic sword, was incredibly powerful. A few repeated strikes were enough to pierce the creature's skin. Much of the work was done as the creature's skin was shredded into pieces. With Kirim in control of Cyan's body, his form transformed. Instead of a face, there was now a black orb with demonic eyes, and his hair became fiery red flames. To conclude the fight, she resolved to use the mist sword with the 8 trembling petals technique. She knew an attack of that magnitude would be sufficient to finish off the demonic monster. Upon being struck, the death worm writhed as it was sliced into pieces. Not far away, knights began investigating after finding the remains of previous beasts. They noticed the mana was exceptionally strong and suspected a demon might have been responsible. The Lord knew that if demons were involved, the matter could not be ignored. He ordered a thorough inspection of the area and for everything found to be burned immediately. However, he noticed traces that felt familiar, almost like déjà vu. His trusted knight, Yoken, holding a torch, advised the Duke to take a closer look ahead. Raising the torch for better visibility, the Duke's eyes fell on the demonic creature. He realized it was a death worm and wondered who could have dealt with such a creature. The thought crossed his mind that it might have been the organization known as Manifestation. After the fight with the infernal creature, Cyan understood that manifesting the demonic sword's power allowed Kirim to control his body to unleash her true abilities. However, if he let his guard down, she could take over permanently. Even so, it was intriguing. Using her to defeat the monster had left him exhausted. He thought it was fortunate he had consumed all that liquid beforehand. Yet, he still felt his entire body aching. He was aware that if it had been a month earlier, his body would not have endured, given that he was now reflecting while enduring several pains. Kirim had a deduction. He had just figured it all out. It was only his appearance that was childish. In reality, he acted and spoke like a child. However, the way he handled the sword and his proficiency were far too extraordinary for it to be just his first time. There was also the fact that he knew the entire geography of Lemia Valley. The sword techniques were those of the mist. It was as if he had trained for 30 years. Moreover, he had also revealed that he had died once before. Now it was certain, he was a regressor. Upon hearing this, he couldn't help but look at her as if she were a fool, for it was obvious. She retorted, saying there was nothing obvious about it when no explanation had been given. However, the boy said he wouldn't waste time on that. She had made another deduction. Eliminating someone like him could not have been easy, and if she were to guess, she would say he had been eliminated by the wielder of Duran Dark, leading to two possibilities. The first, that he had been destroyed in a duel, and the second, through betrayal. However, she felt her guess leaned more towards the second option. He wanted to know why she thought that. She said it became obvious by the way he looked at the sacred sword. She concluded that his sole objective must be revenge. In any case, she kept that in mind. If she ever saw him vulnerable, hesitant, or losing, she would devour him. He gave her a pat to put her in her place, and told her he wasn't a fool. Since she didn't expect him to fall, she rolled her eyes. When he looked at her fallen, he realized nothing had changed. She was just the same as she had been in the previous life. Hearing noises, he decided to leave the tent to see what was happening. Everything seemed quite chaotic that day, and she quickly approached him, worried if he had already woken up. When he asked her if something was happening, she replied that there was. Apparently, remnants of high-level monsters were found near the valley's entrance. He thought it might be related to the large monster he had fought last time. Emily, frightened, went on to say that it had been a long time since monsters of that level had been seen. He wanted to know if there was anything else she could report. However, she didn't understand what he was talking about. He tried to be clear and brief, asking if they had said anything else, like seeing someone suspicious or anything about him. He was still talking to Emily, and waiting for her response when the night Yoken called out to him. It was his father who wished to see him immediately. The young ones knew that could be dangerous, since they hadn't been able to properly dispose of the monster remnants, and this happened because the soldiers had appeared out of nowhere. It seemed that his plan to enjoy a peaceful life before enrolling in the academy had been undone. He formally introduced himself to his father before entering his tent. He imagined his father must have already figured out it was him. The Duke told the boy that he was welcome there. It was a surprise, as he didn't ask anything about the previous day's incident. In a calm tone, he asked the boy to sit. The son was expecting bad news at any moment. He was already thinking about what excuse to make up if his father brought up the coincidences from the previous day. However, he went straight to the point. He asked what the boy had been doing the previous night. He said he had retired early because he felt very tired. However, the Duke still remembered those traces that resembled his son's sword technique. But he had already overthought it. Still, the boy asked his father why he was asking that. The Duke couldn't believe that a child of that age could have killed an infernal being. That was when the boy called out to his father again, as he was lost in thought. He asked the boy if he had heard about the events of the previous night. They were paying some attention to it, but it seemed to have been done by a secret criminal organization called the Mist. The boy feigned surprise. The Duke went on to say they were organizations that had existed since ancient times, although their objectives were unknown. They had already eliminated several nobles under the pretext of purification. They were infamous for leaving behind a black mist. However, one day, they simply vanished. The last time they were seen was 300 years ago. Even so, the remains of an infernal being from the previous night contained traces of that black mist. The black mist was a remnant left behind by Eru, the god of shadows, the deity worshipped by the shadow and the source of its power. It was suspected that the Duke was correct. It was the mist that had eliminated the death worm and the other demonic beasts. Everything was incredible. The father was able to point out exactly who the culprit was. The Duke couldn't understand the reason for the sudden appearance but thought his son should be careful. He wanted to notify the Empire about it so they could investigate immediately. The son was satisfied because he thought his father had believed him. However, the Duke thought it didn't make sense for Cyan to be involved with that organization. He didn't want to think about it anymore, so he changed the course of the conversation and asked his son where he was going. Cyan mentioned that he had heard that His Majesty was going to visit them but didn't know it was that day. The Duke confirmed the presence of the royalty that day and also said he would like to make a request. This left the son quite surprised because his father, in the other life, barely talked to him. Now he already wanted favors. The sound of trumpets announced the arrival of the Imperial Majesty. The Lord of Velius paid his respects on his knees to the honorable Emperor. The Emperor called the Lord by name while still on his royal horse. After dismounting, he asked his friend to stand up and not speak to him so formally. Looking at Cyan, he asked who that child was, and he quickly greeted the Emperor. The Emperor, after hearing that this was his friend's youngest son, asked how such a young child could stay in such a dangerous environment. It was then that he noticed that the Duke's children were different from the others. Cyan initially wondered what the favor could be. Apparently, he just wanted to show his son to his friend. He had always been confined to the mansion when the Emperor visited in his past life. That's why he was so touched that, for the first time, he had his father's trust. The Emperor found his son splendid. He also wanted to show his friend someone who was very special to him, his daughter, the 5th princess of the Yuzif Empire. She introduced herself as Erin Severus, a princess with long, silver hair. Upon seeing her, he noticed that it was the tragic 5th princess he already knew, the girl from his past life. His father told him that he would need to listen to Princess Erin for a day. That was the favor his father had asked for, and he would need to cooperate. The Duke warned that he needn't be so surprised. All he had to do was accompany her. Because she was the same age, he would also see her at the academy later. Cyan remembered seeing her at the academy in his past life. He managed to see her a few times between classes. The Duke hoped it wouldn't be a bad thing to become friends with someone from the royal family, and wanted the same fate for his son. His son didn't want, in any way, to have to fulfill that duty, but he couldn't refuse, because he understood his father's real intentions. He wanted them to develop a friendship like his own with the Emperor. He simply chose the wrong person for that. She couldn't become his friend. However, he couldn't say any of that since only he knew the future. It was irritating, but he needed to obey for now. The Duke, along with his various frontline soldiers, walked with the Emperor. Meanwhile, Cyan had to keep listening to nonsensical questions like the ones the princess was asking. Something silly like why the river was so red. She didn't even know that the river was red because of the beast's fluids. It was a stream that ran through the entire Lemia Valley. However, there was no special reason for it to be red. The demonic beasts were too old or injured to continue fighting for survival. Following instinct, they jumped into the red river, and their remains and fluids merged with the river, making it red due to the decomposition of mana. He also told her that they used it and drank it. That's when she wondered what could be at the end of the river. So she asked him. Cyan told her that it was the demonic kingdom. She wanted to know if that was where the demons lived. Smiling, he told her that if she kept following the river, she might even find the demon king. He knew that no one in their right mind would do that, but it was fun to see her face. That's when they all heard a crash coming from a place that the two couldn't identify. However, the boy, upon seeing that light, realized it was at the 3rd watchtower in the west. Yellow lights meant that demonic beasts were emerging. The 5th princess was frightened to notice that there were demonic beasts in that place too. The Duke's order was to take care of His Majesty. The division of Guardian Knights would come with him to the 3rd post. This was to the west. The Emperor asked him not to be so rigid and told him that he was not there just to stroll. The Emperor was already bored, so he also wanted to help eliminate some demonic beasts. The Duke respected the Emperor's desire to lead them in that battle. The Emperor announced that he would join the battle against the demonic beasts, and warned all soldiers to remain vigilant. Cyan was also ordered to join the battle. That was when the princess asked if he could fight the demonic beast. He replied that he could only provide support from the rear. He also warned her to go to the hiding place. The spoiled princess screamed that she would go with him. Her protector didn't understand what was going through the girl's mind. However, throwing a tantrum, she said they were the same age. Therefore, she ordered that she be taken along as well. The boy wisely pointed out that lives could be lost if he didn't go alone. In typical spoiled fashion, she declared that she didn't care about anyone's life. She was going, and no one would stop her. That was when Cyan, showing his complete dissatisfaction, called Knight Yolkin to resolve the situation. Yolkin immediately said he would act as a substitute for the royal knights and personally escort Her Highness. Upon hearing his commanding voice, she simply looked back, and the knight told her they could proceed. Pointing her finger at the young master, she screamed that he was reckless and demanded how he dared treat a princess that way. The boy then told her that 2 knights could die because of her stubbornness. He informed the spoiled girl that this was a war, a matter of survival for many. With a serious tone, he asked if she could take responsibility for the lives of everyone there. This caught the girl off guard, leaving her teary-eyed. Once the fear passed, she continued following while crying. He asked if she would truly cry like a child. If so, she could return immediately. That was no place for Her Highness. Out of nowhere, a giant bubble appeared, swallowing several soldiers in combat. Shouts echoed to hold their ground. It was essential to advance at all costs, even at the expense of their lives. Raising his sword, the Duke shouted for them to return to formation, protect the Majesty, and eliminate the monsters. The Duke also ordered them to spare none of the beasts. Those words motivated the soldiers to move faster. It was known that Dion Severus, the Emperor of the Empire, had 2 wives. Diana Quazel was his first wife but had already passed away. However, Cassandra Nepellus, his second wife, was considered the prominent judiciary of the empire. The former empress gave birth to the first and second princesses. The current empress gave birth to the third and fourth princes. However, the fifth princess, Erin, was an illegitimate child born of a peasant lover. Because of her mixed blood, she was treated by the people as a scarecrow princess. However, she cared little for others' opinions, fulfilling her duties as part of the royal family. Devoted to her studies above all else, she was, nevertheless, framed for treason. Due to the horrors spread about her, she was expelled from the royal family and the empire. It was said she ended up alone and sick on some distant island. For this reason, people called her the tragic princess. She, however, might have lived a happy life if she hadn't been so ambitious. It would have been better for her to live a life without any form of ambition. But Kirim noticed they were alike. That was how Sion's father wanted him to live. However, the boy said it was different. That was how royal politics functioned. Even as the enormous monster continued devouring people, it was clear the emperor was truly skilled, unleashing sacred lightning, illuminating the area with radiant bursts. The emperor was publicly known for holding an 8-star rank in magic. If he hadn't become emperor, he could have easily been the head of the Mage Association. Sion was sure that an intermediate-rank demonic beast would be no challenge for him. After that intense battle, the emperor wanted a moment to rest. Drinking wine was what pleased him most. It was a pity he felt lonely drinking alone. The Duke apologized but explained he couldn't drink while on the front lines. Meanwhile, the emperor recalled when he had asked about the current atmosphere of the empire. He said there had been a spike in incidents involving nobles, causing widespread anxiety. The Duke needed to know if there was a pattern to these incidents. The emperor explained that all the nobles affected by these incidents were corrupt officials. It was also suspected that the Black Mist was present at all those incident scenes. The emperor asked his friend, the Duke, if he had any idea what it could be. However, he replied that it seemed like the followers of the Black Mist had started moving again. This startled the emperor, who said that the entire situation needed a more thorough investigation. He also mentioned that he appreciated how his friend meticulously cleaned up the trash of society. There was something that had been troubling him deeply in recent days. His friend asked what it was. Dion explained that some nobles were gossiping that everything was the fifth princess's fault. Villiers asked if he was saying that people were blaming the princess for what had occurred. Emperor Dion said he had shocked everyone by stating that it was all nonsense. But among them, there was a persistent group trying to use her as a scapegoat. That was when he asked a favor of his friend. He said that if he were to die before him, he should take care of the fifth princess. Villiers Verd assured him that not only he but also his legacy would fulfill that order to the very end. It was raining in the camps, and Emily was disappointed. On her own, an escort was asking if there was anything else. Sion looked at her and asked what else she could possibly expect. Emily retorted that it was the princess. He couldn't simply stop escorting her. If he continued behaving like that, she feared he would never reach matrimony. He thought he wasn't on a date, and that Emily was exaggerating as always. He told her he was going to train again and asked her to take care of things while he was away. Emily was concerned because it was raining, and yet he never skipped training. He told her not to worry about it, and not to stay awake waiting for him. However, as he turned, he saw a figure. Emily, startled, asked who that was. The girl who had just entered the boys' tent asked where he was going. She apologized but wanted to talk to him for a moment if he wasn't too busy. It took a moment, but Emily realized that the girl was the fifth princess. Attentively, she noticed that the princess, upon entering, was now surrounded by guards and heavily armed knights to protect her. She asked the boy how long he had been there. He hurriedly said it had been a month. He wanted her to be direct, so he asked why she had come to see him. She hesitated for a moment, choosing the appropriate words to say. At that moment, Emily paid close attention to see what it was about. However, the two asked her to leave. As she left, she muttered for the two of them to have a good time together, not understanding what she meant. He let her leave without questioning what she had meant. However, now it was just the two of them in the tent. But when it dawned on him what Emily was referring to, he thought having a good time with a child was never part of his plans. As he turned to the side and muttered to himself, the princess grew concerned. She said she was sorry for what had happened earlier, sorry for acting foolishly. The boy told her not to worry. He also felt a little bad for being rude. She, however, confessed that she would never have said the same thing to him, and as everyone said, he was different. He seemed more mature than his age suggested. He merely observed her and took note of her personality. Continuing, she mentioned that she would also be attending the academy, but he cut her off and said he was sorry. He was honest when he told her he didn't believe she could help him with anything. He told her that if she was there to make friends, she'd better leave. However, she only wanted to be on good terms with him. Was such rudeness necessary? Changing her expression, she asked if he was also one of those people who thought she was just an empty shell, someone who could never be called a princess. All she received from him was silence. She understood and thought there was no benefit to being his friend. She also apologized for wasting his precious time. She told him she thought she hadn't given enough thought to the matter. She just believed they could at least talk. But he was completely different from his brother Askell. She noticed that mentioning his name got the attention she wanted. Now he was willing to listen to her, so much so that he grabbed her by the forearm. The fifth princess showed her displeasure at being held that way. He wanted to know how she knew his brother. She explained that she met him when he was touring the Royal Academy. She said that during that opportunity, Askell advised her not to care about what others thought of her, and simply fulfill her role as a princess. He couldn't understand how that aligned with the brother he knew. He knew well the demonic personality of his brother, better than anyone else. He understood that his brother's schemes had already begun when he met her. His plan was always to bring down the fifth princess. So, he decided to warn her about something. But just as he was about to speak some truths to her, a loud noise was heard. Emily burst into the tent in desperation, calling for her young master. Screaming, she said everyone needed to run. At that moment, the tent was torn apart, and an immense force threw everyone outside. The soldiers noticed that the targeted tent was where the young master was. They needed to act quickly and check his well-being. Emily, amidst the debris of the ruined tent, was shouting. She grew desperate because her young master was engaged in a fight against beastly creatures. She feared for his life. In the tent where the friends were talking, unpleasant news arrived. It was so absurd that the emperor could barely believe what he was hearing. The Duke was also surprised. One of the soldiers reported that advanced-level demonic beasts were attacking the vanguard fields. In the border regions, he also mentioned that the princess had been there when it all happened. Upon hearing this news, the emperor immediately rose and ordered the entire imperial army to head to the vanguard fields. Everything needed to be done quickly. They had to ensure the princess's safety. He had no idea what his daughter was doing in the vanguard field or what she had gone there to see. Cyan now had to deal with death worms and giant ogres. However, all of that should have been in the deeper regions of the valley. Yet they were all there. Something must have changed. He feared it was all because of him. Emily Alves was crying, thinking he might have been hit when the tent collapsed. She declared she would never leave his side. She remembered that when everything collapsed, he had jumped to shield the princess with his own body. After all, in his past life, he had even defeated the Demon King. It seemed impossible for him to die from a mere troll. The fifth princess feared for the lives of the knights in the field. Emily insisted that she shouldn't worry about the knights since they were strong. With her hands over her mouth and tears streaming down her face, she said that everything had happened because of her. Now, the knights who had accompanied her were in serious trouble. However, the knights, standing behind her, said they were fine. They said it was a blessing for them to have the opportunity to protect her as knights of the empire. One of them, fearful, confirmed that his companion was right and that they would protect her even at the cost of their own lives. Cyan didn't have time to listen to speeches. He shouted for everyone to leave because more trouble was coming. That was when the knight who was talking to the fifth princess was grabbed by a giant ogre. After seizing him, the ogre squeezed him tightly between its hands. The princess was desperate and screamed for him. The duke's son told her to stay behind. Seeing the massive ogre grinding its teeth, he knew exactly what they wanted. He said he would destroy the trolls while they fled with the princess. Emily pulled him aside, taking on that responsibility. The only remaining imperial knight shouted at the young master to leave everything and follow him. When the troll began roaring fiercely, the boy didn't hesitate for even a moment. He charged forward as if everything depended on his next attack, knowing that advanced-level demonic beasts were always drawn to him. He felt they were tracking something in him. With that thought, Kiram told him it was because he had consumed too much demonic beast liquid to become stronger. That was why he exuded their scent. Still, it would have been odd if they hadn't come after him. Cyan was angry at her because she had such valuable information, and was only revealing it at that moment. With a malicious smile, she asked if he had already forgotten that she wanted his body. Hearing those words, the boy grabbed her by the waist and used her like a short sword. Even though she asked what he was doing, he simply told her to stay quiet. She pleaded with him to treat her like a person. However, knowing now the information she had, and hadn't shared with him, he didn't care about her. It no longer mattered how many monsters came after him. He would slice and cut through them one by one without stopping. Especially now that no one was watching, he could drink a bit more of the liquid from the advanced-level demonic beasts. Kiram thought it was fantastic, claiming it would be an exceptional feast. However, he told her to wait. Looking to the side, he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. It was unmistakably an evil dragon. It looked up and roared. However, his sword informed him it was merely a baby dragon. He thought the dragon could also smell him. The young man, with ill intent, said it didn't matter what reason it had. It didn't matter why it was there. Nevertheless, he unleashed the manifestation of the demonic sword. No matter what it took, he was going to claim that creature. He told his sword that it needed to devour it. Meanwhile, luminous arrows rained from the sky onto the giant ogre. The emperor made sure of that. However, he wanted to know about the fifth princess and the duke's son. He was informed that no traces of them were found in the tent. Due to express deep regret about it, the emperor understood that he was also worried about his son. Nevertheless, the duke revealed that he wasn't concerned about his own son. All that mattered at the moment was the princess's life. His friend urged the duke to stop being so cold, but the duke simply said that Avert had to know how to take care of themselves. The tension eased a little when it was announced that the young princess had already been found. The girl quickly appeared. Her father shouted her name and asked if she was hurt anywhere. The girl, crying, yelled at her father to hurry because they needed to save him. The father wanted to know who she was talking about. Through sobs, she said it was all because of her, and that they needed to save him. Her father asked her to calm down. Then he asked her to explain what was happening. He, too, was very worried about the words that would follow. Meanwhile, the duke asked Emily if she was Cyan's trusted servant. Lowering her head, she replied that she was. He then ordered her to tell him everything that had happened. Emily was tense because she had never seen the duke with that expression before. She explained everything. The young master had acted as bait to save everyone. The knight who was with them said he remembered where they had been. He said that if the order were given, he would go with the other knights to rescue the young master. Dion asked his friend what he was waiting for and urged him to hurry to save his son. Villers-Vert remained silent for a moment, and then announced that they would do nothing. The emperor, along with his daughter, couldn't understand the duke's decision at that moment. With a cold look, the duke said they needed to handle the current situation first. If the field fell, countless demonic beasts would invade the empire. They needed to rebuild the entire area immediately. Only then could they prevent more incidents like this. Emily made another attempt, asking about the young master. But the duke had made up his mind. He said that Cyan had fulfilled his role by helping the princess. Looking at her with serious eyes, he made it clear that this was the true meaning of being Avert. His friend was somewhat disappointed with the duke's actions, and it made no sense to the princess either. She felt very guilty. Someone was going to lose their life again, and it would be because of her. That was when the three of them heard the fifth princess screaming in terror, her tones signaling something major. Looking up at the sky, they saw that it was a dragon flying over the camp. She was able to identify Cyan clinging to the dragon, though she couldn't understand how he got there. The creatures closest to the creator, dragons, are rare and noble beings. It is rare for inferior beings like humans to approach them. However, Cyan was clinging to one. He imagined it would be an honor to meet such a superior and powerful creature. But the creature didn't need to fly over the people he didn't want to be seen by, especially while letting out its loud roar, announcing its presence. This caught the princess's attention as she looked up. She was shouting Cyan's name. The emperor was amazed to see a dragon and also became curious. He asked his friend why his son was on top of a dragon, asking what was happening and when he planned to save him. However, Villers-Vert simply watched in silence as his son continued clinging to the dragon. The boy, holding on to the creature, lamented his luck because all he wanted was to taste a little of the liquid. He hadn't expected things to go this far. He remembered seeing a demonic dragon. That was when he told Kirim that he needed to devour it, having to fight through several other monsters to reach it. He used a great deal of power because he didn't have time to deal with all those beasts individually. It wasn't difficult once he unleashed the mist sword in its storm of mist form. A few strikes were enough. After that, he jumped closer. Seeing the creature was fantastic. However, he was warned that it wasn't an adult dragon. The power it possessed was divine, so much so that Cyan paused for a moment to admire it before reacting to its might. Irritated that the dragon struck Cyan's body while he was possessed by the sword, he asked how it dared spit at her during their first encounter and if it wasn't concerned about the consequences. She also revealed herself with a sword pointed at his face, and that's when he landed a blow, causing the dragon to roar. The next attack was extremely powerful, forcing both of them to retreat. Even the mist sword wasn't enough, and he had to resort to the 8 trembling petals, which also didn't seem to be working. That's when he realized he probably wasn't ready to defeat a dragon yet. He noticed that his fighting rhythm was slower compared to other beasts he had faced after so many battles. The potential of his attacks had dropped significantly, and it happened just when he needed to face such a monster. The dragon took off from the ground, ascending into the air, and in doing so, launched a powerful attack, as if thinking Cyan wouldn't fall for the same trick again. That's when he realized the dragon wasn't attacking but fleeing instead. He couldn't let that happen. Without much thought, he ran, gained momentum, and leaped onto the dragon, bringing us to the present moment. Now, atop the dragon, he was wondering how to handle the situation. Kirim was furious and wanted to know why he wasn't doing anything to resolve the situation. He seemed angry too and asked what she expected him to do with everyone below watching. She didn't see the problem. If he decided to use her, he should at least do something. He asked if she wanted him to wield a demonic sword with all those people watching. He said that if he did such a thing, he'd be burned at the stake. She didn't care. She just didn't want him sitting on the dragon doing nothing. However, he was still thinking. From up there, he could see a circle forming around his father, along with several swords floating nearby. It was easy to recognize it as 8-star ice magic. His father was about to wield the sacred sword of the skies, even knowing that his son would also be eliminated along with the dragon. And so, his father did, invoking a high-level power. The son believed his father truly deserved the title of guardian of the continent. The dragon seemed to be trying to dodge the swords of light. Initially, it appeared to be succeeding, so much so that Cyan began cheering for the dragon. He thought it might have a chance. Then he noticed a sword of light heading toward them. He realized the dragon might not be able to avoid it. Leaping off the dragon to dodge the sword of light, and still in midair, he thought he couldn't lose such a meal. Kirim told him that if he didn't want to fall to the ground again, he should fly. He replied that he couldn't use her because he'd be burned at the stake. She asked if he was just going to give up and die, but he thought he should stop overthinking. That's when an idea crossed his mind. Now equipped with a plan, he thought he had a way out of this. His sword asked if he was really going to fall into that bubbling red river. The boy admitted he had no other choice, and so he plunged into the red river. Meanwhile, someone with silver hair and horns was admiring the sight of a dragon flying nearby. Another being with horns, but with reddish hair, asked if it was a young one. His master replied that it was and that it seemed to have lost its mother and run into some trouble. However, he also thought there must be more powerful demonic beasts around. His vassal mentioned that only humans lived on the other side, which surprised his master. He didn't believe a dragon could lose to something as insignificant as a human. That's when the two fell silent, as if pondering something. Then his vassal asked if something was bothering him. His master said he had sensed a strange energy and pointed in its direction with his fingers. The energy was strange, but also familiar. His vassal said that if it worried him, he could go check it out. However, before he could advise his master not to eliminate everyone he saw out of boredom, his master had already spread his wings and taken flight. Yet, he promised he wouldn't cause trouble. The red-haired, horned demon didn't seem to believe his master. Meanwhile, in the Red River, the waters bubbled, and Cyan emerged. At first, he was relieved to be intact. Slowly, he climbed out of the river and leaned against the rock. Suddenly, he found himself hating his life. But out of concern, he checked to see if Kirim was still alive. She, who had also fallen into the river, was completely filthy from its waters and told him not to speak to her. She was trying to decide whether to eliminate him now or later. The boy told her they would clean up when they returned and that she didn't need to be angry. She replied sarcastically. She asked if he also planned on returning and warned him not to let his guard down, as they were in the demon realm. Confident, he told her not to worry, as there was no way they would encounter a demon there. That was when he heard a voice saying it knew something entertaining would be waiting for him there. The young ones immediately recognized that voice. It was him, the voice engraved in their minds. There was no way to forget that voice. The figure atop the rock asked if he was really human. He introduced himself as Demon King Valkyrion, a figure Cyan recognized from his previous life. In the past, everyone who had the chance to see him described him as the incarnation of evil. And that was exactly what stood before him now, the one responsible for all that destruction. He was annoyed that he had appeared when Cyan was so weakened. The being, in turn, was irritated because instead of answering him, the boy simply took a combat stance. He asked if the boy wanted to fight him, even though he was just a child. Cyan knew the strength of his opponent, and that he shouldn't take his eyes off him even for a second. The Demon King moved quickly from side to side, right in front of Cyan's eyes. He was surprised when the boy managed to track his movements, and even cut a strand of his hair. In truth, Valkyrion seemed to be in a great mood. He started laughing and said humans were a species with potential. The sword, though hesitant, wanted to know who the figure in front of them was. Cyan explained that it was the Demon King. She became worried, doubting they could defeat someone of that level. In his current state, Cyan knew it was impossible. His only option was to try and escape. He was surprised when he looked back and saw the Demon King lying down. The Demon King, eyeing the boy suspiciously, said he would ask one more time. He was curious to know if the boy was human. Cyan replied that he was, and the demon asked how he got there. He explained it was through the river's current. Valkyrion, still lying comfortably, asked if it was his first time in the demon realm. Suspicious of the boy, He said his aura was strange and wanted to know who he really was. However, Cyan replied that he was just a normal human. The Demon King noticed that the boy seemed to know him. Cyan assured him he had never been there before. The demon said it must be true, otherwise he would remember. After all, he had never seen a human before. And where else could a boy have seen him? Cyan found Valkrion's casual demeanor odd, as he was indeed the same demon he had known in the past. He needed to confront him, so he asked what the Demon King was doing there. Valkrion simply said he had sensed a strange energy while on patrol. As Demon King, it was only natural to check on the lands he governed. He sat up and began smiling. He asked the boy to repeat what he had just said. Cyan repeated his words. The Demon King felt belittled, as the boy wasn't intimidated upon learning he was the Demon King. He began throwing a tantrum, claiming he knew the boy recognized him from somewhere. What kind of child would react like that? He asked if his mother had never warned him that the Demon King would come for him if he misbehaved. However, Cyan thought there was no way this was the same Demon King if things were like in the past. The demon invasion should be happening soon, but this guy didn't seem like someone capable of leading it. Especially if this was his true form, if this was who he really was. Cyan couldn't understand what had caused him to change so much, from a carefree, playful demon to a destructive figure. That was when he asked Valkrion what his true desire was, assuming he was indeed the Demon King. Valkrion smiled at the question, admiring the boy's courage for asking. He said it was nothing special, he just wanted people to live well and eat well. But if someone got in his way, he would destroy everything and anything, as that was his duty. As the ruler of these lands, for a brief moment, Cyan sensed the true monstrosity of the Demon King he had known in the past. Though suppressed now, some incident must have released the chains of that malevolent side. He would have to ensure that such an incident didn't occur. It was then that he suggested to the whirlwind that they make a deal, leaving it surprised. Unconcerned, the Demon King said that something was about to happen to him, something that would threaten the people he cared for. Changing his tone, the Demon King asked what he was talking about, as it made no sense. Cyan couldn't pinpoint exactly what the incident would be, but he was certain that something would trigger a great war between humans and demons. Valkrion became angry, crossing his arms, and asked if Cyan thought he wanted to take over human lands. Calmly, the young man said that was why he wanted to negotiate with him. He asked the Demon King to promise that he would never start a war, no matter what happened. Valkrion thought the young man was talking nonsense. He then said he might not start the war. He asked what the young man offered in return. Confident, the young man assured him he would help. No matter what happened to the Demon King, he would help and always do his best to defend him. Still with his arms crossed, Valkrion looked the young man up and down, assessing his intentions. Looking deep into the boy's eyes, he was sure the boy knew something and began to laugh. He asked the boy's name, and he revealed it was Cyan Vert. Then he looked at the young man and said he promised him, as ruler of the Demon Kingdom, that he would not invade human lands, regardless of what might happen. He spread his wings and flew upward, telling the boy he'd better uphold his promises, because, after all, he was making a deal with the Demon King himself. Cyan looked at that figure, showing no fear, while the king looked down, perceiving the boy's true intentions. He said that would conclude everything after the deal with the Demon King. Cyan was found by the edge of the Red River. His condition was considered a miracle. The inspection team conveniently found him lying there, and he managed to return home. After that, he earned the nickname, the boy who survived the Demon Dragon. They all returned to a monastery on the borders of Valias, which was being used as a military hospital. While there, he received a visit from the fifth princess. He looked at her, and thought things would resolve smoothly. She seemed breathless and irritated. However, she asked if he wanted to be hers. That left the young man confused. He didn't know what she was talking about, as he had just woken up. Caught off guard by the fifth princess's unexpected invitation, the young man simply declined. His response made Eren visibly upset. She asked if he thought it was unexpected, given that she was the powerless fifth princess. She even wondered if he was like the others. Cyan, noticing her demeanor and how troubled she seemed, knew the princess was the weak link of the imperial family, but the way she treated her own life made the outcome of all this quite obvious. Yet he couldn't stop thinking that an unfortunate person might be the cause of her sorrow. He knew her brother always wore masks. He was clear with her, saying that, for now, she was unable to offer him any benefit, as she possessed nothing. Thus, he explained he would be taking significant political risks. However, he said he would be watching her until she achieved what was necessary. Shyly, she asked if he would truly watch over her. He said that was correct. He also said it was a promise. Therefore, she wasn't disappointed. Standing upright, she said she clearly understood what he was trying to say. She rephrased it, that he was telling her to improve until she was recognized by him. Pointing a finger at him confidently, she said he could wait because he would witness that she had no idea how, but she would gain his recognition. Without any enthusiasm, he said he would wait for it. He thought she had become motivated again. As she turned to leave, upon reaching the exit, she said she had one more thing to say. She turned her head slightly to look back and thanked him for surviving, as it was very important to her. At that moment, he remained silent, simply waiting for her to leave, as her presence wasn't the most pleasant. Footprints found in the forest near the rear belonged to some criminals. They were apparently after an artifact, and when they found it, they were satisfied. Now they only needed a little more before they could leave. Their happiness ended quickly when someone called his name, making them widen their eyes. They also couldn't move anymore. The pressure was too overwhelming, as if they were bound by invisible chains. The person speaking to them said it was a dimensional box, and considering the timeline, those things wouldn't be traded. It was an artifact in the shape of a box with a dimensional space enchanted with mana. This allowed the user to store whatever they wished. It was believed to be the masterpiece of the magical council of the kingdom of Garum. The masked young man, upon approaching the criminal, warned that he had been watching him for over a year, since it seemed that someone had been secretly taking things from the empire. Extending his hands toward him to demand the dimensional box, he stated that he would be keeping it, and identified the criminal as the 7-star magical knight of the kingdom of Garum, Ronald. The wrongdoer recognized him as soon as he removed his mask, revealing his identity. Upon learning how he was discovered, the young man explained that through his investigation, he found out that after the criminal extracted liquid from the remains of demonic beasts, he brought them to that place using a carriage. He deduced that the criminal must have had an informant. However, the wrongdoer became desperate upon realizing that he knew of a possible connection between him and the informant. Cyan Vert told him that he no longer needed to lie. The liquid from those monsters had already been sold on the black market. He remembered when his sister had obtained liquid from a hellhound through the black market they operated in, but it was still unclear who had leaked the information. He knew he couldn't let that information go unnoticed. The criminal didn't fully understand how that boy managed to capture him, but he was already starting to move, albeit slowly. In an attempt to win, Ronald used magic against him and cast a fire repetition. He stated that, evidently, the price of a mistake was fatal. Saying this, he unleashed his power on him. After thinking he was about to be finished, the boy realized that the rumors about the youngest of the Vert family were not lies. However, his power did nothing to Cyan. Nevertheless, his rival thought it was over. With him using just that one strike, he was upset about the waste of a good dimensional box. He hadn't expected this to happen while searching for monster remains. That was when the strike reached his hand. It took him a few seconds to realize there was nothing left. That was the initial price of the audacity of having confronted Cyan Vert. In an attempt to hurt him, he noticed a black mist. He seemed to know well what that could mean. Before he could finish his deduction, he was struck by a blow. The young man, holding him by the neck, demanded that he make his choice quickly. He could reveal the routes and identify the informant, and everything would end pleasantly. However, if he persisted and chose a fate worse than death itself. When he said this, the boy's eyes were filled with malice. The western border of Velias was the exchange point, a bustling place that didn't raise much suspicion. They were unloading 2 boxes at a time. It seemed they could handle much more. The delivery man asked the other how many boxes there might be. However, upon opening one of them, he was horrified. It contained Sir Ronald's upper limb, still with his mouth agape. Terrified, they looked around, unable to believe someone could have done something. But those inspecting them, from afar, staying hidden, were Cyan Vert and Kirim, who were watching everything from above. They knew that the 7-star magical knight, Ronald Crimson, hailed from the kingdom of Garum. He traded monster liquid on the front lines without the knowledge of the Yuzif Empire. The items they traded were sent to the kingdom's magical council, a place where people obsessed with magic gathered. They researched the origin and structure of magic itself, creating new magical formulas and aiming to surpass the limits of humanity. For now, they only crafted practical artifacts. Kirim didn't understand his reaction to wanting to stop those bandits, as he had said he would live solely for himself. However, he wanted to do good for others. The young man, to defend himself, simply stated that he didn't want other users. Meanwhile, at the Yuzif Empire's mansion, the young Aska looked at the sky from his window, and, in a moment of anger, uttered his younger brother's name. He seemed resentful, because his younger brother had gone to the front lines with their father. However, he had a female presence there, and that woman, who was quite close to him, asked if he was talking about his brother from another mother. He replied that he was. He also said the boy was concerning in many ways. With their bags packed and ready to depart, Emily was celebrating finally leaving the dreadful front lines. She was so excited because the academy didn't compare to that horrible life. Cyan imagined that, for him, it would be the beginning of a new hell. The academy wasn't a place that could meet Emily's expectations. In reality, it was a place where all sorts of political interests existed. However, the information she had were just rumors that the academy instructors were incredible. She was already wondering if she could find a suitor for marriage there. The young master was not pleased when he discovered her intentions of also going to the academy. Returning home with her luggage, she noticed, as she walked, that the atmosphere there felt different. Or rather, she noticed Kranz's presence, who, as soon as he saw her, started trembling and ran away. Although Cyan only wanted to greet him, there wasn't time for it. The situation was so remarkable. When Kirim found out who it was, she explained it was her brother. She wanted to know what was between him and his family since they were complete opposites, just like him and his father. However, he believed the true complete opposite was someone else. When he entered the main hall with his luggage, he was surprisingly well received by all the servants. This incident shocked him. At other times, they wouldn't even look in his direction. Yet now, they were being courteous as if his father or that other person was arriving. He noticed many things had changed in the span of a year. He thought his hard work had paid off. So much so that, when he touched the doorknob to open his room, he sensed a strange presence. Unfortunately, he recognized that energy. It was the energy that made him tremble. The repulsive presence was behind the door, hiding a smile on its face. Feigning friendliness, his older brother, smiling, said it had been a long time. Kirim told Cyan to stay calm, but he already had clenched fists and a stern expression, which was not good. Askell insisted and asked if he still remembered him. With a friendly face, he said it was natural since the last time they saw each other was before Cyan left for the academy. Cyan couldn't stay calm in that moment, nor did he know if he wanted to. His intention was singular. He wanted to rip the false smile off his traitorous brother's face. His only desire was to eliminate him. However, showing her loyalty, Kirim held him back, affirming that if he didn't stop, it would end right there. She told him to quickly regain his senses. She explained that finishing it at that moment wouldn't bring any good. After that moment of anger, he managed to control his heartbeat. He even bowed to pay respects to the elder brother of the Vert family. Askell found it strange that Cyan still remembered him despite all the time that had passed. Cyan said he could never forget his brother's face. The elder brother placed a hand on his head, saying he was happy. Cyan had to restrain his murderous impulses. Askell admitted he was worried that Cyan might not remember him anymore. It was, in fact, a relief. He also mentioned hearing that his brother's swordsmanship had improved greatly, and that someday, Cyan would be able to help him. Looking at Cyan, he said he hoped for his help on the battlefield. The younger brother, without hiding his dark intentions, said he was also eagerly awaiting that moment. This caught the attention of the elder brother of the Vert family, who sensed something different in his younger brother's gaze. Suspicious, he said he was relieved to hear those words, as it was the reason he had returned home. Cyan knew he was the type of person who wouldn't even glance at someone unless it was absolutely necessary. However, now that he understood his brother's intentions, he was feeling much calmer and more rational. He even managed to fake a smile with a gentle expression, saying it was his desire to see his brother. At that moment, Emily burst in angrily, not expecting there to be so much luggage. She asked the young master if it was so hard for him to help her with the heavy bags. After saying this, she put the bags down and asked the master how he could leave her alone. However, she calmed down when she saw the face of the first young master, feeling embarrassed. Feigning friendliness, he told her he had heard she was very close to his brother. He said that was great and that she should keep up the good work. With that, he left. After confirming the departure of the first young master, Emily yelled at Cyan, saying he could have warned her about his brother's presence, but Cyan asked her to leave for a while. When she hesitated, he angrily told her not to make him repeat himself. Emily noticed his words were harsh. Concerned about him, she decided to obey. As soon as she left, Cyan went to the bathroom and couldn't hold it back. He vomited, disgusted by his brother's presence. However, still seething with anger, he asked Kirim why she had stopped him. She said he should be thanking her instead of confronting her. The young man said it was a good chance for her to seize the golden opportunity to fully take over his body. With a meticulous gaze and a deceptive smile, she told him not to be fooled. She only wanted his hatred to grow even more because, that way, it would be more delicious. He smiled, acknowledging that such behavior was indeed worthy of her. Slow footsteps echoed in the hallway until someone knocked on the door. This person wanted to speak with Askell. After their entry was granted, they announced that they had discovered the whereabouts of the second lady. As instructed by him, Askell showed interest and wanted to know where she was. It was reported that she remained in the northern part of the continent, in the lands of the White Elves of Ruin. This information brought a smile to his face, thinking she was among a race that hated outsiders. He instructed them to inform him at the first sign of her return to the Empire. His personal servant thought something had cheered Askell up. He asked why he seemed that way. The young master replied that it was because he looked happier than usual and guessed it was because of his encounter with his brother. He laughed and said it could be seen that way, depending on the perspective. However, he didn't turn and instead looked at the servant with a menacing gaze. He clarified that the servant was wrong, as he was in a terrible mood. This left his servant shaken, who apologized for disturbing him further. Asuka was troubled by the look in his brother's eyes. He couldn't understand how the boy could have such a gaze. It felt as though he had encountered an enemy. He didn't think he could have misinterpreted it. However, he had many concerns about him. He realized he would need to observe to ensure things didn't go too far. His trusted servant decided to assign someone to carry out that observation for the young master. After his servant left him alone, seated near the window and gazing at the sun, that murderous glare wouldn't let Asuka's thoughts flow peacefully. He was certain he had to uncover what his younger brother was hiding. In front of the mansion, a carriage with 6 knights escorting it waited for the young master. Emily was deeply disappointed because she wanted to accompany him to the academy. Despite the young man explaining it wasn't his fault, he could only bring 1 escort knight to the academy. She complained that he should have mentioned this from the start. He asked her to behave. She, in turn, insisted that he act sensibly as well. From the carriage window, he bid her farewell. She shouted that he couldn't just leave like that. Then she yelled at him not to be sad. Even if they became the subject of ridicule at the academy, waving her arms, she called for them to take care of themselves. He knew that was her way. She always acted like that. It reminded him of when he was 8 years old. He had a severe fever that left him barely able to stay conscious, with no one there to care for him. Emily had run out into the rain, carrying him on her back. She screamed for help. She begged someone, anyone, to help her young master, as the situation was critical. Luckily, someone came to their aid. He knew that if it weren't for her, he might not have survived. He would likely have been found lifeless somewhere in the mansion. So he shouted at Emily to behave herself, because if she didn't, he'd have to put an end to her antics. To him, she was much more than a servant. Hearing this, she waved her arms and smiled. However, she hadn't heard a word he said. The young man noticed that having 6 intermediate-level knights escorting just 1 person seemed odd. He took a deep breath and realized that things would heat up quickly, even before his arrival at the academy. When the carriage reached a distant place and night was beginning to fall, the escort knights signaled to each other, communicating that the time had come. Young Cyan, inside the carriage, pretended to be asleep but was aware of everything happening outside. They informed him that they thought they should camp there for the night. Feigning ignorance, he asked where they were. He was told they were in the city of Saffron, and that they would probably reach the next city by morning. He requested to be informed when the preparations were done. Looking at the night, he thought the man was a liar, as there wasn't a forest like that near Saffron. Nor was it a safe or suitable place. They were in the middle of nowhere. It was obvious what they were trying to do. Then he was told he could step out of the carriage. He calmly exited, remarking how fresh the air was. After asking them who was behind it all, he noticed the exchange of glances among the knights. There was also silence. After that, they wore expressions suggesting they intended to finish him off. Quickly, anger surged through Cyan as he noticed one of them laughing. With a wild look in his eyes, he asked the man if he hadn't heard the question he had just asked. With sarcasm, the man said there was no need for him to know, as he wouldn't be leaving that place, and he drew his sword. Another knight stated it was unfortunate things had come to this but insisted it was nothing personal. They said they had tried to be nice and make everything as pleasant and painless as possible. He saw the young woman who simply closed her eyes and then raised her sword as if she intended to cut him in half. The skilled young man simply dodged, and his next strike was fatal. He wasn't there to play around. The man who tried to hurt him lost his head. He was going to ask again who was behind it all. This time, with the other knights frightened by what had happened to the first, they hesitated to speak. In a demonic voice, he asked why they were still standing there, and if they hadn't been expecting this. The knights couldn't believe their own eyes as one of them attempted to attack him from behind. With attacks full of mastery and skill, he quickly dominated the situation, turning it to his advantage. One knight thought he could escape and ran as fast as he could nonetheless. Cyan merely summoned his dagger with his power, and it flew to the fleeing knight. The remaining knight couldn't believe it. He didn't think the boy could possibly be just 11 years old. He understood there was a reason the boy had survived fighting the dragon. The boy was prepared to speak as well, knowing that this mission would never succeed. In tears, the knight could barely stand. His legs gave out, and he fell. The young man demanded he tell him everything as quickly as possible. That's when the knight revealed that the mastermind behind it all was Lady Margaret. However, the young man found it suspicious how easy it was to extract that answer from him, but he spared his life. The knight confessed everything he had done while driving the carriage. He said it had been a request from young Krantz. It involved his mother. They all believed the mission had something to do with her. Cyan thought that when he found that coward, he'd have to teach him another lesson. The knight caught the young man's attention because he wanted to say something. He asked what would happen to him. He wondered if, when they reached their destination, Cyan would kill him, asking this with tears in his eyes. However, the young man asked if he wasn't saddened by the situation. The remorseful knight said they had tried to eliminate him, so it was only fair he had the right to do the same. The boy told him to keep driving. Whether he was useful or not made no difference, because he might still change his mind about letting him live or not. The knight merely thanked him. The young man announced that they had arrived. It was the central city of Saffron. When the bad news reached the Duchess's ears, she began breaking whatever was in front of her. She trembled with rage upon hearing the news that the knights sent as an escort for the young master. One had disappeared, while the others were found. Finally, it was reported that young Master Cyan Saffron, 10 days ago, upon hearing the news, had brought one hand to his mouth. Just thinking about the consequences of what had happened, they couldn't understand how it had gone that way. The servant delivering the news said they had underestimated the young master. The Duchess, however, was furious that they couldn't even get rid of a cursed child. The servant speculated that someone might be acting behind the scenes without their knowledge. She ordered him to be silent, saying that now, after what they had done, the boy might want to take revenge on her son. She found herself desperate as she remembered Cyan's words before leaving that mansion. She only asked him not to do anything. She didn't want the information to leak either. He should eliminate anyone related to that incident. The loyal servant respected her authority without question. As he left her presence, he was seen by the servant loyal to Askell, who had been sent to monitor and report to him. Meanwhile, Cyan was lying inside the carriage, satisfied that it had been 10 days since he left Saffron, and the knight sent to eliminate him was behaving well as his subordinate. He knew that by now, everyone was aware he was still alive, but he would safely reach the academy. Therefore, it was wise to quickly think about what he would do about Brian. The knight soon announced their arrival. Cyan received the news with only one eye open, as he remembered the past. They weren't good memories, but that academy had influenced him in many ways. Upon arrival, he showed his family crest and introduced himself as Cyan Vert, from the house of Duke Vert. At first, they just looked at him. After a second, they reacted positively. He was informed that he should go to the dormitory and wait. After that, he would have to participate in an entrance ceremony. He wasn't sure if he had heard correctly. A key and an envelope were handed to him. He was quite suspicious, so much so that he asked if they were sure they were giving them to the right person. When Brian, his knight, arrived with the luggage, he admired the place. That was the royal corridor. Cyan didn't understand, as no one from his household had ever been assigned to a place like that. Someone had to be behind this. The young man looked at the knight and asked if that was all the luggage. The knight replied that it was. The young master, looking at him, stated they had arrived at the academy. His role was already fulfilled. He looked at him with a neutral expression, but his subordinate assumed it was the end. However, all the boy was taking out of his pocket was a sum of silver coins. When the knight received it, he was surprised. He was told it was for all the hard work well done. The young master told him he thought it would be enough for him to start a new life wherever he wanted, since he might end up in trouble if he returned to Veliez. The knight realized the boy was right. However, he knelt before him and declared that he was Brian Kendrick, an official knight of Veliez. He asked for permission to serve him for the rest of his days. Yet, the boy hadn't noticed he was a knight. Brian explained that he was the worst among them all, which was why he often handled positions like a coachman. He recounted that his father always said that when he found someone he could trust and serve for life, he should ask that person for permission without hesitation. The boy thought it was all a great foolishness. This left the knight slightly confused, but the boy continued by saying that if he ever struck him from behind in the future, Brian declared that even if the master did that, he wouldn't mind. Cyan placed his hands on the knight's shoulder and told him not to think of betraying him. He also mentioned he wouldn't attend the entrance ceremony. They would only go to the elemental test. The knight agreed immediately. At the office of the Royal Academy's director, it was noted that there were highly talented students that year. All the instructors were prepared for the beginning of the test. The one currently taking the test was the 5th princess. Her magic ranking was 2 stars, her physical ranking was B, and her light element was at 52%. Another student, Seth Chahakan, had a mana ranking of 3 stars, a physical ranking of A, and his sand element was at 71%. Upon reviewing the scores, the director concluded that all the children were already very impressive. However, the young Cyan Vert had low mana, 1 star. His physical ranking was still S, but his shadow element was at 92%. This was surprising because his sister, known as the Divine Child, had only achieved 88% in her water element upon graduation. That was what the academy instructor, Sarika Nigrith, concluded. The director found it incredible that even the child known for her outstanding talent didn't compare to her younger brother. The instructor expressed concern about his element being darkness. The director shared the same concerns since such elements could deteriorate significantly. Moreover, he was in the royal corridor. The instructor was already aware, as she had heard rumors from other instructors. There was nothing they could do, as they were specific orders from the emperor. The director stated that apparently, Cyan had saved the young princess from monsters at the border. The emperor was even considering a marriage. The fifth princess, who had been deemed a mistake, marrying into the Vert family, which always produced exceptional individuals, was something they believed could happen. Following this, the conflicts over succession would intensify. The empire could even end up divided because of this, potentially leading to civil war. The director advised the instructor not to overthink it, as all they could do was watch. Walking through the corridors, Cyan reflected that in his other life, his element was slightly less than 80%. He wondered if it was because he had consumed so much liquid from demonic beasts that it reached 92%. In the corridor, Krantz encountered him and was startled. He thought it would indeed be terrifying to see a ghost. The boy next to him asked if the one in front of them used to be his slave. The one asking was the son of Marquis Penneron from the kingdom of Garum. His name was Popper Penneron. That tall boy also bullied him as much as his brother did in his past life. He thought it was quite fortunate to meet him so soon. This way, he could discipline him quickly. Popper Penneron remarked that the boy needed a good beating, and his friend even tried to warn him. However, it was already too late. He already had that look. Quickly, the boy messing with him got what he deserved. While his friend shouted his name to try and stop it, he feared he too would be properly disciplined. After disciplining one of his bullies, he asked his half-brother if they should also have a little chat. Saying this, she placed her hand on his shoulder, and he sweated profusely out of fear of potential consequences. Cyan whispered in his ear that he didn't care what he did behind his back, but if he caught him again, he told him he wouldn't graduate completely. This made the boy reconsider his future actions. As he walked away, Cyan thought his life there could turn out to be quite entertaining. In the hallways, the Royal Academy instructor Sarika Nygrid was also walking, lost in thought. She was reflecting on the director's words about whether the young man would become a villain or a hero of the empire. She thought it would be wise to keep an eye on the boy. While doing so, she was selecting a book. However, she couldn't find it on the shelf. When she turned her head, young Cyan asked if she was looking for that book. The instructor's expression changed completely, but as she turned to face him, she claimed that students weren't supposed to be in that area, thinking they wouldn't be able to detect his presence. She asked if he was Mr. Cyan and requested that he return the book. She needed it urgently for her research. As he was about to hand it back, after holding it and thanking her, she prepared to strike him. Defending himself with the book and splitting it in two, he asked if that was what she was looking for, and he called her the master of the assassination organization Miss Sarika Nygrid. From his past, he had the impression that the instructor was just an ordinary person. He also remembered the first time she approached him, asking about his growth. He recalled her hoping for his improvement, as someone being persecuted by his own brother. He remembered telling her he didn't care, initially thinking it was a joke. However, she quickly revealed her true intentions and her interest in his life. After that, they had a brief conversation, and she mentioned it was rare to see someone with an 84 in the darkness element. He also recalled everyone telling him that element wasn't special. She explained that it was, because humanity still didn't understand it, and said she believed his potential was infinite. At the time, he was very confused, especially when she said she was eager to work with him. He thought that maybe this person could help him. However, he was mistaken. He was being deceived. He shouldn't fall for the story of that innocent-looking woman. Being an instructor there was just a cover. She was actually an assassin. She, the master of the Mist Assassination Organization, was hiding in the academy where all the nobles and royalty of the continent gathered to enhance their abilities. She looked at him seriously, and said she would listen to what he had to say outside the laboratory. It was then that she asked him to follow her. He thought she hadn't reacted as he expected, and upon looking around, the place hadn't changed at all. It was still the same mess. She served him a cup of tea, and he asked if she had poisoned it. He thought it wasn't surprising things were going too well. Smiling, she said it wasn't a very strong poison. She told him not to worry because the poison was mild. At most, it would melt his organs. He felt satisfied and thought that wouldn't affect him, someone who had consumed the fluids of countless demonic beasts, and had also eaten Emily's cooking. He told her to try something a bit stronger next time. Irritated, she asked how much he knew about her, and also wanted to know how he had information about the orders contained specifically in that obscure book in the library. She noticed he was aware of its exact location. She asked if he was trying to imply that he was also part of the mist. Looking seriously at him, he asked if she wanted more proof. Not subtle at all, she told him he had grown bold because of the elemental test. He commented that, before leaving for Chatrayan, he had asked everyone if just one escort knight was sufficient. Why had nobles been experiencing accidents in recent days? Looking at her with sharp eyes, he asked when the purification project had begun. Upon hearing those words, she adopted a devilish demeanor, and said she didn't know what he was talking about. He revealed to her that he was referring to the incidents, and she knew exactly what he meant. She made it clear that he might regret having said that. However, he noted that as an instructor, she shouldn't speak that way. Losing patience, she struck the table, hurling it toward him, but he moved quickly and wasn't hit. He asked if that was how she intended to answer his question. He retaliated against her strike, splitting the table in half. She, however, was already preparing her next attack. She told him she believed she had already proven her identity. Still, she remained skeptical about it. She revealed she was the master. Thus, if he was involved, she should know, and continued her attack. The young man, in turn, blocked. She had no intention of letting him escape. Cyan saw no other choice but to prove that he wasn't involved and that he was being sincere. He drew his cursed dagger and countered her attacks. He also said that if she didn't believe him, he would have to prove it, and he continued striking repeatedly, until she sensed something and asked him to wait. However, he still kept striking for a bit longer. What she had noticed was that the dagger was the demon sword of Kirim, which could only be wielded by those chosen by Era. Seeing that the woman had calmed down, the young man asked if she now believed him. He revealed that he already knew Mist was looking for the successor at that moment. He also explained that the person they were searching for was right in front of her, and offered to be taken to Eru. Somewhere in ruin, in what seemed to be an alleyway at the door of a house, Cyan and the Mistress of Mist stood, and using magic, she broke the chains securing the place. She noticed the young man didn't seem surprised at all upon arriving at the Mist's hideout. She pointed him toward the altar, as he had requested. However, he would be on his own from there. He already knew that since it was a subspace created by the god of Mist, it was far more expansive inside. He was recalling the coordinates, 2 at 4 o'clock and 3 at 11 o'clock. While he was thinking of the coordinates, he was attacked by a group that quickly launched daggers at him. He had been expecting something like this, but that welcome party was a bit eccentric. Though he had anticipated something subtler, he joined the fray and began battling the warriors. He subtly blocked and struck, gradually increasing his strength. All those sent to try to dissuade him from continuing were slowly being overpowered by him. They noticed he was deflecting their daggers with incredible speed and realized they needed to use something stronger, like secret arts. Perhaps that would still be insufficient. They might need something more powerful, like blind spot formation. However, upon seeing his opponents use magic, he decided to use his secret arts as well. This left them confused about the boy's abilities, which worsened when he used the deadly wave. It wasn't an ordinary skill but a technique used by mercenaries. It released the physical form of true intent. He was so skilled at using his techniques that one of the members attacking the young man suddenly found himself unable to breathe, just like the others who had already fallen to the ground. But it was all temporary. It was merely a method the protagonist used to neutralize them for a while. He looked to the side and noticed one of them was still standing. Perhaps he was superior. If that was the case, he would need to use mis-swordsmanship. However, at the same moment, his opponent used the rod of the great tree, and the duel began. The two clashed fiercely, using their techniques and skills. Cyan was surprised to see his opponent block the mis-swordsmanship, realizing he might be strong to pull off such a feat. The rival noticed he was also using his own specialties. Thus, he removed his mask and threw it to the ground, revealing his identity. The Mistress of Mist could no longer hold herself back. Seeing her caused quite a shock. He hadn't expected her to intervene. She wanted him to show what he was truly capable of, and seemed quite excited for it. To prove his true intentions, Cyan unleashed the 8th instance of the Black Mist, a violent barrage. She noted that she was also familiar with both mis-swordsmanship and dark magic, and that only heightened her interest in Cyan Vert. Her intention was to push him as far as he could go, unleashing the thrill of battle. The young man knew what drove the Mistress of Mist, as she became completely intoxicated by it. Consequently, she wouldn't stop until she had finished him. He should know from experience. Once she entered her combat form, she became a different person, and since he wanted this so badly, she was ready to fight him. The mis-swordsmanship storm of mist was unleashed. The young man regretted not inheriting her twisted love for battles. She pointed out that the space was created by Eru and could handle as much power as necessary, ensuring no energies would be detectable from outside. He was pleased to know he could use his powers. He might end up defeating her, but he realized he had no choice. As soon as he thought that, in an instant, he was on the ground, startling his opponent. Kirim said she knew this would happen the moment he let his guard down for even a second. The Mist Master, however, recognized the sword. She admitted she didn't want to get involved, but since she knew it, she understood its nature. The Master knelt in reverence to the magical sword Kirim, who demanded an explanation for the situation. She asked how the Master could claim to be a worshipper of Eru and still attack her master. The rival explained she was merely confirming whether he was truly the successor. It was her duty as a leader. Kirim didn't appreciate her audacity and said all she needed to do was summon her god. If she refused, Kirim was ready to personally engage in the challenge. Saying this, she revealed her claws. The leader, however, advised her to worry more about the successor before thinking about fighting. When Kirim turned and saw the young man collapsed on the ground, nearly dead, the master warned that, since she had gone through a complete materialization to reveal herself, she was in an inefficient process that was draining her master's life force. Kirim, in turn, shook the young man. She asked if this was why he had consumed so much monster fluid, just to embarrass her like this. However, the mist leader said she never refused an invitation to fight, especially when it was a chance to battle. The magical sword Kirim. She even brought her hand to her mouth while still holding the young man. She couldn't believe she was surrounded by a group of lunatics. It was frightening to see the young man regaining consciousness again. She heard him ask what she thought of appearing so suddenly, to which she replied that he should stay quiet. She wanted to take just a minute to teach that master a lesson, who would feel honored to fight the great Kirim. The sword said she wouldn't show mercy, even if the master begged for it. The opponent said it would be lucky to reach that point. However, a harsh voice declared that was enough. The leader recognized the voice as that of Lord Eru, who appeared in a magical vortex. Cyan paid attention when Eru ordered that the successor be sent to the altar. His commands would be swiftly carried out. Cyan was satisfied, as they would finally meet him, Eru, the god of shadows. Someone once said that the god of the black mist was purely evil, taking lives as if it were ordinary. They also said that each person should decide for themselves what was right or wrong, and no one else. If someone's sense of justice could endure even after death, it was enough, though this logic was often called madness. Cyan claimed that this god only wanted to protect the weak, which made him a foolish god. So he decided to enter the dimension and meet him in person. As he did, he looked at the staircase. At the top of it, he saw someone. He decided to climb the stairs with his sword. That's when he heard the person above ask if he knew who they were. The young Cyan, looking at the stern face with mysterious eyes, clad in silver armor, without hesitation, replied that he did. He was the god of the mist. After repeating the boy's name, the god asked what made him think he could be the successor. Cyan, however, responded that Lord Eru should be able to feel the mist's power emanating from him. Eru confirmed that there were two paths to becoming his successor. One of them was for him to personally bestow the mist stone upon someone. The other was for the mist stone to be absorbed by someone it deemed worthy. Since he didn't know Cyan, it could only be the second case. The mist stone, which was supposed to be on the altar, had disappeared a year ago, and beyond that, he had awakened Kirim, whom even Eru didn't know the location of, already feeling indebted for utilizing him. Another thing that made everything evident was Cyan's gaze, which transcended his apparent age. Eru understood that Cyan was a visitor from a time unknown to him. These words made the young man wonder why Eru didn't know about that time. From this premise, Cyan revealed that he had assumed the god might have a connection to this time travel. Lord Eru found the boy's thinking amusing, that he believed Eru was the all-powerful god. However, Eru felt deeply disappointed. He had been cast out by the deities long ago. Cyan knew Eru was right. He shouldn't have placed such high expectations on a god. Still, the deity before him believed things would now become a bit easier. Cyan was the perfect successor, and he had appeared right at his doorstep. This would finally lift the great burden off his shoulders. He also noticed that he would take something else with him, something rather problematic. He asked him if the magical sword wasn't enough, because he also had possession of the sacred sword. Smiling, the young man replied that he wasn't planning to do anything with it yet. Pulling out the piece of the sacred sword's hilt that he had previously cut, and with a look of pure satisfaction, he revealed that it would never see the light of day. It could just end up as trash. The deity found it all strange, but the knight in silver armor and tattered clothes remarked that none of this was his concern. Taking a few steps forward, he said customs were customs, and must follow the proper procedure. Raising his hands, he revealed great power. He poetically spoke about the successor, asking what he, as heir to such power, would do. The young man, however, recalled that when they asked him this question in his past life, he simply said he wanted to live for his brother. But now, that answer seemed somewhat foolish. Yet neither of them thought much about his earlier response. He wondered if they wanted something from him, or simply didn't care. The deity also reminded him that there was nothing more dangerous than a foolish conviction. Last time, it seemed Eru already knew of the pathetic end he would meet. This time, he said he had no great causes or beliefs. He thought things would be different this time. However, his answer remained an enigma to the deity. Still a young man, he stated he would use his power completely selfishly, aiming for his own goals. The god of shadows warned him that he could decide what was right or wrong. However, he had to ensure he would have no regrets. It was wise to answer prudently, as depending on his response, the deity might demand his life at that very moment. The young man, however, said he didn't act like someone with anything to lose. He wouldn't follow anyone's orders except his own. That was the path he had chosen. Eren noticed the young man was planning something. He wanted to know if he would share it. Sion made it clear that his plans wouldn't be revealed easily. The deity didn't mind too much as long as the names offered by believers were purified. In any case, he wouldn't prolong the conversation. With a happy look, he decided to continue speaking with his daughter. Pinching her round cheeks, he said she had changed a lot since the last time he had the chance to see her. He asked if it was because she liked Messi so much that she ended up that way. Kirim, visibly uncomfortable, asked what the god was doing there, but instead, the deity only revealed that he was a happy father. Since he had nothing to offer her master, he was trying to give something to her instead. She even asked the doctor for help, but he pretended to look away, finding the father-daughter interaction quite amusing. It was then that he cast a few sacred pentagrams upon her, asking her father what they were. However, as soon as the pentagrams touched her round face, which had been a black sphere with hints of pink in place of hair, she transformed into a beautiful woman with long black hair. This was Kirim, who hadn't even known she had a body. Sion noticed that not a bit of his mana or magic had been used to turn her human. However, the daughter, very upset, grabbed her father by the collar and demanded to know what he had done. He explained that he had only given her a bit of his life force and asked if she thought it was meaningless. He believed she would need a body if she wanted to go further with her master. At that moment, she became even more agitated. After everything that happened and now back in the dormitory the next day, the knight who had joined him wanted to understand the situation. He looked at the two ladies in the young Master Messi's room and the strange key. He remarked that things didn't seem so simple, as the two were glaring at each other intensely. Kirim questioned what kind of instructor would visit a student's dormitory so early in the morning. She suggested the instructor improve her conduct, or she might end up being the subject of rumors for teaching a special subject to that student. The instructor, however, explained that she had merely come to deliver some notes personally to ensure the future of a special student. The sword remarked from the other side that the leader of the organization should act cautiously. The two women seemed like wild beasts ready to devour each other. The intense aura between them made the atmosphere heavy, making the young master want to leave and abandon the situation. He informed the knight that he would be heading out. Brian, his knight, was afraid to stay there alone with them, especially since they were on the verge of starting a duel. Away from that boy and with the heavy atmosphere already spreading through the community, he watched everything from afar. It was clear that the atmosphere and air there felt lighter, yet he sensed a familiar scent in the air. From a distance, he saw someone being thrown far away, seemingly in trouble. In a corner, kneeling, the person lamented, appearing weak and helpless. 3 youths in an alley accused another person. One of them suggested it would be good to try something different. Agreeing among themselves, the 3 decided they would make the person eat a magical orb. One of the boys magically conjured the orb in his hand. The person lying on the ground wore boyish clothes. With short hair and visibly frail, they were being coerced into accepting the magical orb. The one offering it was a blonde boy with blue eyes, insisting heavily since his friend had crafted it personally. He thought it would be disrespectful not to eat it, but the person refused. As he was about to insist further, someone arrived and shouted for them to stop. The girl who arrived said they couldn't treat a fellow student that way. It would be a disgrace to them as nobles. One of the boys introduced himself as Barrett Louis Mill, the eldest son of Duke Lil Mill's house from the Kingdom of Garum, and asked who was addressing him. The girl introduced herself as Erin Severus, Princess of the Yuzif Empire. The boy laughed upon hearing the princess's name, and said he had been wondering who she might be. But since she was merely the 5th princess of the Yuzif Empire, he stood close to her, looking her up and down, and said it was a pleasure to meet her. Angrily, she replied that she had no intention of shaking his hand and demanded he explain the situation. The boy told her she must have misunderstood and suggested she ask the person in question. Looking at the person lying on the ground, he corrected himself, realizing she was wearing boyish clothes, and asked her directly. Lifting her by the collar, he asked if they had been bullying her. Coerced, she said no, that they were just playing around. The princess told her not to hide anything from her. She could understand the situation just by looking at her. However, the girl insisted everything was fine and asked her to leave. She kept repeating that they were just playing. The boy, smiling, said he had heard all he needed to hear. He revealed he was starting to feel displeased. The princess, undeterred, said she would take the girl with her regardless. When she extended her hand to help, he grabbed her arm firmly and told her she didn't understand the situation. She had already heard Leximus ask her to leave. What more did she want? The spoiled boy was about to give the princess a piece of his mind. Before he could say anything, he was swiftly interrupted by a leg sweep, sending him to the ground. The princess was pleased to see Cyan appear at the right moment. However, the boy looked at Cyan and recognized Leximus. Upon looking closely, Cyan realized the accused girl was Leximus, someone he remembered from the Klein Castle in the Kingdom of Garum. He recalled a fierce duel. It was Cyan Vert versus Leximus, who was considered the best swordswoman on the continent. She was originally from the Yuzif Empire but, for some reason, after graduating from the academy, she joined Duke Klein's house in the Kingdom of Garum and even changed her nationality. He remembered their sword duel lasting quite a while due to her skill. Quick, strategic, and with incredibly powerful attacks, she was an incomparably strong rival. However, in the middle of the battle, he managed to catch her off guard and knocked her to the ground with a kick. Once she was down, he fulfilled the role assigned to him. He had been ordered by the Empire to eliminate her from the ranks and prevent her from escaping unscathed. Yet, after infiltrating the castle, he ended up having an official duel with her, with no special reason for it. Someone who had reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship without mana. He hadn't wanted to eliminate someone titled the best swordswoman. Now, however, she was just a frightened and coerced girl, constantly persecuted. Cyan Vert looked at the boy struggling to get up and wondered why there were so many idiots that day. He also wanted to know if Cyan Vert himself was really there, having heard rumors of him being on the front lines. The boy asked if Cyan wanted to join in their little game. Cyan simply looked on, finding the whole thing ridiculous. He also noticed the boy was misusing the mana orb, which could lead to the human body's destruction from within. He said that a game where he forced someone to swallow a mana sphere was particularly interesting, but he also formed a massive mana sphere in his hands. His was so large that it cast a shadow over everyone present. Looking firmly at the boy, he told him to open his mouth now. After the matter was resolved and back in the princess's quarters, where Leximus had been brought to recover, her external injuries were mostly healed, but she needed to rest until her internal wounds were fully mended. The princess asked her to rest for a while. The young girl thanked her, saying she didn't know how to repay her for everything. The princess was satisfied and proud, saying that all those fools ran away when Cyan scared them, so they had only done what they should, and there was no need to worry about it. Cyan found it shocking that she had managed to endure all that, but he had expected the best swordsman on the continent to be different. Looking at Cyan, the young woman said that perhaps he knew her because he kept staring. He replied that he thought he knew her, but in fact he didn't. He apologized for being unpleasant. The girl said it wasn't a problem. The princess asked her where her dormitory was because if those idiots came back, she would deal with them. She replied that she stayed in the commoner's hall. The princess was shocked to learn she was just a commoner. Leximus explained that she had been enrolled thanks to instructor Velton, who promised her financial support during her school career. However, he was suddenly dismissed. When Cyan asked if she had anyone to support her, he understood that if things continued like this, she would have to leave the academy. The princess called her. Poor thing. Cyan, during the time the princess hadn't realized Leximus was a girl, suggested she take her as a servant. She could also take the chance to learn swordsmanship from her. Meanwhile, the princess was shocked, thinking Leximus was a boy. The young man clarified that she was a girl. It was hard for the princess to digest that information. However, the young woman wanted to explain herself. She never intended to deceive Her Highness. She simply felt more comfortable with short hair and boys' clothing. That's why many people mistook her for a boy. The princess apologized for not realizing it until her friend pointed it out. Showing concern, the fifth princess asked if she was willing to follow her. If so, she wouldn't suffer any more persecution from bad people while under her protection. She could also learn whatever she wanted and live a comfortable life. This moved the young woman. Princess Erin confessed that she didn't like being alone. Leximus, showing gratitude, said she would become someone the princess could be proud of. However, the princess said there was no need to thank her because it was all Cyan's idea. But when she turned to look at him, she noticed he had already left without even saying goodbye. Now outside, Cyan felt satisfied. He had done enough and was sure the princess would handle the rest. It becomes clear why Leximus Yuzif would never have lost her mana if not for Barrett Louis Mill. Now, the best swordsman on the continent had all her mana. She would be challenging even for him to defeat. But for now, his interest was elsewhere. He had to carry out an order from Master Sarika of the Hall that morning. It was his first purification mission as a member of the Mist. Even for a first mission, it was already challenging, but the Master believed in him. He worried that things might get even harder if she was already sending him off like this. While walking down the corridor, there was a massive explosion that covered everything in dust. Seeing a large shadow, he thought a demonic beast had invaded the academy. The large figure asked if he was Cyan Vert. He was startled to realize the man knew his name. Not only his name but also his 1-star magic ranking and physical ranking. He was the youngest son of the Verts. The figure introduced himself as Seth Chahakan and said he was also a newcomer. Cyan found it hard to believe that the man was the same age as him. He wasn't sure if someone like that had existed in his past life. Seth went on to say he had heard a lot about Cyan, how he had defeated many demonic beasts, even survived a dragon's attack. Moreover, Cyan had received an S ranking. Since not even he had achieved an S, Seth decided he wanted to fight the young man. That's when Cyan remembered. That mark on his chest symbolized Spania. This confirmed the rumors that the Prince of Sand was joining the academy. Spania was a country in the middle of the desert located in the western part of the continent, and due to the powerful army led by the first prince, a genius in both magic and combat. Even for the Yuzif Empire, it was difficult when they attempted to conquer that nation, but that powerful nation fell into ruin because of the sudden death of its only successor. The cause was considered to be an illness. It was said he focused too much on gaining muscle and neglected his health. Cyan hadn't met him this way in his past life, and now he was irritated. But if his memory served him, the prince was naive. It only took Cyan asking if he wanted to duel at that moment for the excited young man to immediately want to settle who was better. Determined, he wouldn't take no for an answer, convinced his opponent also wanted to fight. However, Cyan declined, leaving the prince surprised. Yet young Vert explained that duels weren't authorized without the academy's permission. Therefore, a formal request would have to be made. The Sand Prince, believing him, asked where they could do that. Cyan urgently told him it would be on the 3rd floor of the main hall. Excited, the prince rushed off. Without even realizing he was going the wrong way, this made Cyan note that the rumors about his brain being all muscle might be true. Cyan wasn't even sure if duels could truly be requested but assumed they couldn't. He also hoped not to see him again anytime soon. For now, he wanted to focus on the purification project. Elsewhere, being watched, was Lord Zickerman. He was being informed that the preparations were complete. He demanded they stop stalling and deliver the goods to the clients. This man was one of the 3 wealthiest individuals on the continent, known publicly as a kind man. He was famous for making numerous donations to charities, though in truth, he ran the slave market. Cyan overheard him saying that day would mark the debut of his life's masterpiece. However, the target to be purified was already in his sights and would be dealt with sooner than expected. Kirim sensed a very complex energy, and her master asked what she meant by that. It was the target who was hiding something strange. That slave owner was standing in front of a cell, telling someone they had finally calmed down. He told the person inside to rest and referred to them as his gold mine. He noticed a red mist moving quickly, and his henchmen were already being taken down. Falling to the ground, he saw the mist lower slightly, allowing him to see what was happening around him. Lord Albus pointed forward, ordering his henchmen to catch the intruder immediately. He demanded the intruder reveal themselves, as their hood and mask made identification difficult. Everything happened so quickly. None of the guards hired to protect the Lord's life were of any use. The last of them was being dealt with efficiently right in front of him. Barely able to believe it, he realized he would be next. He wanted to know where everyone else had gone. The intruder told him he would soon find out, as he would be sent to the same place as the others. He remarked that the Lord had hired many people, but the money spent on them was not worth it. Zickerman, having fallen to the ground in fear, tried to negotiate with money. He claimed he had plenty, even offering more than necessary. Despite this, the intruder struck him. Cyan didn't care whether he had money or not. He simply told the Lord that all kinds of inhumane experiments and species creations had been conducted under his direction. He was even the manager of the slave market, which was strictly illegal. Cyan offered him a chance to repent. He gave him 1 minute to rid himself of all the sins he had committed in life. After that, all pain would be dissipated. Lord Albus understood he wouldn't leave that place unscathed. His sins were far too heavy. However, he chose to shift all the blame onto the people who bought the slaves, calling them the true monsters. He insisted that he was merely trying to survive financially, and that what he had done wasn't so bad. Cyan knew someone like him would never repent, but the minute had already passed. He chose not to repent, so there would be no leniency. Everything would be dealt with painfully, as he had chosen. The thick mist of the 9th form, Assault, was the ability Cyan selected to eliminate him slowly and thoroughly. After a few moments, the purification was complete. Cyan decided to inspect the area before leaving. His sword led him to a cell where she sensed a combination of 2 distinct energies. Quickly, he slashed the cell's bars with his blade. He couldn't see where the source was, only sensing peculiar energies. All he could see was a thin woman lying on the ground. However, she appeared lifeless. She was just a human, with nothing seemingly special about her. But Kirim urged him to take a closer look at what she was holding. It was a dragon egg, fully scaled and shimmering as if made of diamonds. When the young Verd brought something so striking into his quarters, it left his trusted knight deeply unsettled. However, his master merely said he found it on the ground while walking around. It was hard for Brian to believe. Who would find something like that just lying on the ground? Yet, the boy seemed serious. Looking at the egg, Brian wondered how his master could be about to give away something so precious. Nevertheless, he was indeed preparing to hand it over to someone. His knight, distressed, asked what they would do if it hatched. Unbothered, his master said that would never happen, as dragons were beings with great energy demands. He also explained that even if it were constantly filled with elemental mana, it might still not hatch. He said that an egg separated from its mother was merely a pretty gem, until the egg began to crack. Brian was startled when he heard the sound of the shell breaking. Beams of light burst from the egg, leaving them both shaken, as they weren't sure what would emerge from it. They were eager to see what would come out. To their surprise, something unexpected emerged from the egg, a baby half-dragon. The creature left the night bewildered. They had no idea what to do. Cyan Vert quickly realized the being was either a dragon nor a human infant. It became clear what the woman had done. Things seemed more complicated than he had anticipated. The small draconic baby, upon opening its eyes, immediately recognized Cyan as its father. Without hesitation, it leaped into his arms, seeking paternal comfort. At that moment, his heart skipped a beat, as the baby seemed convinced he was its father. Kirim, laughing uncontrollably, congratulated him on becoming a father at the age of 11. However, he shifted the responsibility to his sword. He reminded her how he had wanted to get rid of the egg, and how she insisted it might fall into the wrong hands. He acknowledged that she had been right but also wanted to ensure it wouldn't hatch. Kirim had assured him it would never hatch after being separated from its mother. She had even added that it was basically a gemstone. In her defense, she reaffirmed that she hadn't expected this to happen but admitted she hadn't been entirely certain. Veins bulged on his face in frustration because she had guaranteed it wouldn't happen. No matter her excuses, it was hard to deny reality with the hybrid standing before them. She pointed out that its mere existence could pose a threat, and the young man knew she was right. The little baby, now tired from some playful antics, peacefully fell asleep. The baby was simply a hybrid of human and dragon. The world they lived in was far too dangerous. If the Academy discovered such an anomaly, the director might try to get rid of it. There was also the strictness of dragons concerning their lineage. If they learned of the child's existence, they might try to eliminate it, and all creatures aware of it. He didn't want to take the risk. Besides, the child was destined for a life of pain. He raised his hand to harm it. Kirim, smiling at him, asked if that was truly what he was going to do, but added that if it was his choice. His hand hovered near the child's neck, and the sword remarked that if that were her fate, perhaps it would be better for her to have no future. But the baby slowly opened her eyes, and in a sweet voice, called out to the young man, causing him to hesitate for a moment. The little one then jumped back into his arms, uttering her first words, expressing how much she liked him. He realized she was very endearing. He decided to hold her in his arms. He felt an emotion he had never experienced before and thought it might just work. He resolved to raise her, holding her with emotion and showing a faint smile. Despite what Kirim might think, he wouldn't use her as a servant or anything like that. At the Vert Castle, young Kranz's mother paced back and forth, anxious and unsure of what to do. Cyan was putting her in a difficult position. It would reflect poorly on her to do nothing for him as his mother. She was in a foul mood when her eldest son arrived. Calm and patient with his mother, he told her to speak with him if something was troubling her. Not wanting to burden him with her issues, she simply said she was fine. As soon as she left, he requested a report from his servant Kellen. Kellen reported that 5 knights had been found alive, and the missing one was presumed to be with the other young master. He also confirmed that Lady Margaret was behind everything, just as his master had suspected. Aska wanted to know if there was anything else. The final piece of news was that the youngest son had been placed in the royal hall. Upon hearing the information he was already aware of, he was not satisfied, as the servant failed to add anything new. The servant immediately noticed his master's disappointment, and knew what he did to people who made that mistake. He couldn't give up his position after so much effort. In desperation, he shouted that he would go back and get the job done properly. Asko placed a hand on the servant's shoulder, and said he knew how hardworking he was. He also asked him to act quickly. He reported that his brother was undoubtedly hiding something from him, and he needed to find out what it was. With firm steps, Sarika walked quickly down the corridor. She was in a hurry to speak with Cyan. When he noticed her presence, he was surprised, as he didn't have any classes that day. However, she wanted to know why there was a baby at the academy. After taking a deep breath, the young man said it was a long story and asked her to say what she was doing there. She confirmed that she could hear the story another time. She had a more urgent matter at hand. He had caused quite a few problems, and now had an official duel request. She wanted him to know that what he was thinking wouldn't be noticed was the least he should do. With that duel, he would undoubtedly attract more attention than necessary. The young man was shocked to learn that the big guy had actually found a way to make the duel happen. Kirim didn't understand what all the fuss was about. It was just 2 11-year-old boys fighting. Cyan knew that 11-year-old boy was no ordinary person. All he could do was ask the date of the duel. It was happening in exactly 2 hours. This could be problematic. However, the opponent had been waiting for this moment. He was sure the adversary felt the same. Although young Cyan expressed his lack of willingness and interest, he managed to handle the situation another way. Seth mentioned he expected a combat duel, but the only options there were fencing or magic. Holding his sword, he asked if Cyan would use magic. Cyan replied that if Seth didn't, he wouldn't either. Right from the start, his opponent liked him, and they almost bonded over their shared sentiment. It became clear that the big guy was skilled. Despite his size, he was quick. His sword was also very heavy. However, that kind of heavy attack was hard to dodge, but with his skill, he managed. And for an opponent like that, what was needed wasn't strength but speed with precision. Seth thought that alone wouldn't work against him. When the fight was going reasonably well, neither had made significant progress. Seth thought Cyan was merely trying to dodge the attacks. As much as he thought about it, it was difficult since Cyan was using only a rapier, and that was enough to block. He even dared to confront him directly in just a fencing duel. When Cyan was about to be attacked, he dodged, lowering himself to the big adversary's legs. At that point, the opponent even thought Cyan had eyes on his back due to his agility. Seth, after receiving an attack aimed at his legs, balanced himself to avoid hitting his face on the ground and quickly positioned himself to counterattack. The speed with which he did all of this impressed his opponent, who already thought him agile. At the academy, whenever there were duels, there were also people interested in watching them. The sudden counterattack also surprised the audience. However, the big guy seemed to enjoy it. He was just warming up. He was angry because he had lost in fencing. His enthusiasm for concluding the duel was evident. He said he would give it his all. The opponent's talk was tedious, but Cyan pretended to be interested. His opponent positioned his feet and told his rival to give it his all as well. He released a large amount of mana, making his intentions clear. The academy director, who was also watching the duel, noticed that the fight was now moving into magic. However, he found it strange that they didn't use both skills at the same time. It was explained that Cyan had won with swords. After the explanation, the director realized that Cyan had indeed won, considering one was rank A and the other rank S. If only the ranks were considered, it would be obvious. However, having aptitude was just a basic requirement. From every angle, Cyan's disadvantage was enormous. His opponent had 3 stars in magic. Sarika thought Cyan was asking for everyone's attention on him. The magic duel had begun. Seth demonstrated impressive skill and created a massive fist. He called it the Fist of Death, which was controlled primarily by his own hand. Only then did Cyan notice they had moved to the magic duel. He was about to be crushed by that giant fist, with the ground beneath his feet crumbling. His opponent shouted that he wouldn't let Cyan escape this time. Blow after blow, Cyan managed to dodge them all. During the duel, the white-haired boy decided it was time to use Desert Fang. It was a kind of sand fang meant to trap his opponent inside a sand cocoon. That's when he realized why his opponent was ranked as a 3-star mage. More than ever, he needed to be quick. If he overthought and failed to move, he could be caught at any moment. Analyzing the situation, he deduced that his opponent might be capable of using 4-star magic. However, the tutors maintaining the barrier must have been struggling with the intensity. Seth asked how much longer he planned to keep running and dodging attacks like a small animal. To Cyan, it made no sense for him to say that. He wasn't just going to stand still and let himself get hit. Frustrated, the opponent claimed that a real warrior wouldn't be dodging like that. When Seth called him a brat, Cyan had to retort, saying they were the same age. Afterward, something resembling a cyclone began forming around Seth's arm, and he launched a new attack. All of this led to the use of Sandstorm, which even surprised the headmaster. The instructor thought the boy was only at a 3-star level, but that magic was undoubtedly beyond that. Proud of himself, the formidable opponent declared that his prey wouldn't escape this time. The sand cyclone kept growing, giving shape to the sandstorm he was creating. Cyan had the brilliant idea to stand completely still, as dodging wasn't the behavior of a warrior. In the area reserved for students, Cyan's loyal knight was testing the temperature of a baby bottle. He was grateful for his experience in taking care of babies since he had cared for his siblings when he was young. The scene was quite endearing, a large knight wearing a pink apron calling for the little one. But when the child looked, she was startled, as the baby he was preparing the bottle for was no longer there. She had grown significantly, yet still spoke in a sweet, childish way. Back at the duel, things were so intense that the spectators couldn't fully comprehend what was happening. The tutors maintaining the barrier warned that it was about to break. They found it hard to believe that this much power was coming from just 2 students. Some thought the headmaster should intervene, as the situation was getting serious. Instructor Sarika agreed and even asked him to stop the duel. He wanted to wait a little longer, sensing that something more was about to happen. He noticed when Cyan used his secret expansion technique to create a sphere of void. When she looked back toward the duel, Sarika quickly realized what was happening. Now it seemed as if the power of the two was merging. The headmaster thought young Vert was truly talented. All that power left the instructor and the Mist Master impressed by the attacks being displayed. The tall white-haired boy didn't understand when his magic was simply reduced to nothing. Others also noticed that his magic had just disappeared. Some questioned whether the black sphere they had seen earlier was magic. Others had never heard of it. Young Vert asked if he wanted to continue the duel. It was obvious that he had lost in both categories. Realizing this, he knelt, incredulous at how quickly he had been defeated. For him, it was hard to accept losing in both swordsmanship and magic. He was just sad. Cyan began to feel guilty, thinking the fight might have been a bit unfair. However, his opponent quickly recovered, punching the ground. Then he declared he was tired of fighting weaklings. Now he had a reason to continue training. He extended his hand to his opponent, saying he didn't know when, but he wanted to fight him again someday. He asked if Cyan would accept the challenge when the time came. Cyan, ever cordial, said he wouldn't. Now, in another place, it was known that dragon growth was rapid. When he looked at the little one, it seemed she was now 6 years old. She came running, shouting, "Daddy, welcome home!" He wasn't sure if a dragon-human hybrid could grow this fast. He knew she would soon appear to be the same age as him, given how quickly she kept growing. Sarika suddenly arrived, commenting that it would be hard to keep hiding her. She could help him conceal the demonic sword but couldn't help hide a draconian human, especially if he got involved in reckless acts like he did earlier. She asked what he was thinking. The little girl was growing so quickly. Cyan could hardly believe it. He had only taken his eyes off her for a moment, and she was already so big. Sarika left the matter to him since he had found her during a mission, but she warned it wouldn't be easy to handle. Young Vert mentioned that Brian was in charge of her care. There was also a barrier in place to hide her. The Mist Master didn't mind as long as he didn't cause trouble. Upon seeing it, he found it quite disappointing as a reward for winning the duel. Upon leaving the structure, he asked him to be more cautious for a while. Nothing good would come from drawing so much attention. Brian wanted to know what it was, and his master explained that it was a warning letter. While all this was happening, Kiram continued sleeping on the couch. The young man looked at the knight. With a mischievous tone, he told him that they would all be expelled for bad behavior. That remark even frightened the little girl, who asked what they would do and if they would live on the streets. He was surprised and wanted to know when she had learned such things. Indeed, she was growing up too fast. Running his hand through her hair and stroking it, he told her not to worry. The night Brian was concerned about having to return to Velia's. Cyan, unconcerned, said he would handle it. He realized, upon reading the notice, that it was sent by the principal himself. This meant there would be a conversation. He still remembered when he wanted to join the Knights of Light to dedicate himself to his brother's well-being. Even though the principal had said it didn't seem like the right path for him, he thought it was something the principal was aware of as well, as he wanted to give him advice. He said that nothing good would come from going down that path, whether facing challenges or dealing with a cruel fate. That would be the experience of living as someone else's puppet, no matter the outcome. Sooner or later, he would end up blaming his brother. Upset, he remembered the words the principal had said to him. However, Brian had other concerns. He thought they should name that child. Then Very suggested that Nana would be a good name. She asked if he had even thought about it, but she would accept it. The little girl was very happy because Nana was the same name spelled backward. She was excited to be Nana Vert. He was surprised to learn that the girl knew his first and last name. Heading to the principal's office at the Royal Academy, he seemed to be jotting something down and thinking about Cyan. He remembered the duel and knew the young man had great potential, but to absorb 4-star magic. Using only a 1-star black orb, he was incredibly talented. But that didn't seem to be very difficult for him. The principal wanted to learn more about his limits. The principal had taught the current emperor, Dion Severus, and also the father of the last empress, Diana. He was one of the few 9-star mages on the continent, and had focused solely on education. Walking slowly down the corridor, heading to the principal's office, Cyan thought he wanted to know more about him. Since in this life, out of nowhere, he interfered in the royal succession battle, the principal's personality didn't seem to have changed. Smiling, the young man concluded that the principal knew his arrival was near. Even so, the principal placed a 9-star restriction barrier. Cyan thought it was a test but had no problems with it. Inside the office, the 9-star mage pondered what the young man might be capable of. It would take a great mage to destroy that barrier. While wasting time thinking about this, the young man had already come up with a strategy and jumped through the window. After entering the room, he told Principal Kundal that he was there to express his dissatisfaction. After hearing a complaint, the principal realized that Cyan had simply ignored the barrier and entered through the window. The principal was impressed, speaking to the young man about his dissatisfaction, because Cyan knew the letter had come from him, but after seeing the barrier outside, he was sure of one thing. The warning letter was just an excuse to test his talent. The principal had no reason to hide it. He admitted it was an aggressive method, but Cyan had proven his talent. However, he wouldn't retract the warning. He could try to persuade him otherwise. Instead, the young man wanted to ask a question and was encouraged to proceed. He wanted to know if the principal desired the empire's expansion or honor for his own family. That left him quite irritated. It was a very bold question, as none of that was of interest to the principal. The young Cyan Vert didn't seem content. He asked if, after Emperor Dion's death, if the third or fourth prince tried to claim the throne instead of the first prince. He wanted to know if the principal wouldn't side with anyone. The principal concluded that Cyan wasn't just bold, he was also arrogant. But the young man didn't mind, as in his previous life, he was worse than that. He remembered that in his past life, during the succession battle for the throne, the principal had played a significant role in making the first prince, Lemilai Severus, the emperor of the nation. Even though he was a cruel man, he secured the throne only because he eliminated his own brothers. And when the principal opposed it, he incriminated himself. Accusing him of being a traitor to the empire, he sentenced him to death. He had ended up being betrayed by those he had supported. Curious, he slammed his hand on the table before standing up. He said all of it was nonsense, that the century would not fall. He had thought the boy was a genius but realized he was just a fool. The boy, however, knew exactly what he was talking about. The first and second princes didn't have a mother, while the third and fourth were just as strong as the first. And then there was the Nepellus household, from which Empress Cassandra hailed, known for its keen eye for power. The peace of the empire was already at stake. That house would do anything to stay in power, and the day peace collapsed, that academy would be finished. The headmaster couldn't understand how an 11-year-old child could think like this. He knew every political detail. Calming down a bit, he asked why the boy was bringing this up. The young man said it was to negotiate. He claimed he would help maintain peace for the family and the academy, but only if the notice was revoked. The headmaster could barely hold back his laughter, as he had only pretended to be angry to set a trap. And now he was asking what power the boy had to help him, trying to see how he would get out of this. He wanted to feel the weight of the boy's arrogance. With a wave of his hand, after pointing a single finger, he caused chains to fall from the pentagram on the ceiling. These were the infamous chains of judgment, which had already bound the boy. Hungry for a fight, the boy asked the headmaster if he would continue speaking like this, even while tied to those chains. Kundal, stepping out from behind the desk, said that no matter what the boy did, he would never escape. However, he paused for a moment and wondered if he might be overestimating his own abilities. The boy, smiling, said he would prove his point. His next move left the headmaster shaken. After using the sphere of void, now with an amplified technique, his body turned into black mist. Despite the chains glowing, they could not restrain the mist. It was all unbelievable. The sphere of void was just a one-star magic, yet the headmaster noticed it had absorbed everything. The mist kept consuming his magic, and even the chains descending from the pentagram were being absorbed. It was all astonishing. However, the headmaster wanted to see just how talented the boy was. After fully absorbing all those chains, the boy asked the headmaster if he now seemed useful. Convinced, the headmaster said he would revoke the notice. He asked if that was all the boy wanted. After revealing who he was, the boy said he just wanted a peaceful life as a student. After everything, it was hard for the headmaster to believe his words. However, they were sincere. He truly didn't want to see the academy collapse again. Elsewhere, Brian was returning from his shopping, satisfied because he had bought lots of sweets. He felt happy just imagining little Nana eating them all. While walking through the strangely quiet streets, he felt a sense of unease. For a moment, he thought it might just be his imagination. Unfortunately, it wasn't, as several people emerged from a dark alley and began walking toward him. When he realized it, he was startled. Quickly, his purchases fell to the ground, and now, standing in the middle of the street, it was just him and them. After his conversation with the headmaster, young Vert was advised to attend classes, and this was already the last one of the day. It had been a long time since he felt so bored that he almost fell asleep at his desk. He thought he might be forced to relearn something he had already seen 20 years ago. It seemed impossible. It was all torture. There weren't even any missions to take on. The only thing he could do was train. When he arrived, an angry voice asked him where he had been, as the classes weren't over yet. Cyan told the fifth princess that he had just gone to the bathroom. However, the lie didn't stick, especially since the bathroom was in a different direction. She wanted to know if he planned to keep lying like that. That's when he asked Leximus if the princess allowed her to call her by name. It was then she realized he called her, Your Highness, and explained that he did so because he was just a commoner. While everyone was having a healthy discussion, someone came down the stairs and called the fifth princess by her name. This immediately drew their attention to the person. Young Vert also noticed. Two young men descended the stairs, greeting the fifth princess informally. The light-haired one was named Pavian, and the red-haired one was Nerovian. She bowed to them, greeting them formally. However, they only wanted to ridicule and intimidate her, asking if she was now associating with commoners. While the two exchanged greetings with the boys, the princess and her maid, young Vert simply watched from a distance. He only greeted them when the conversation was properly directed at him. Without bowing, he said it was a pleasure to meet them, but he remained formal. However, the two of them said it was impossible not to know the youngest son of Duke Vert. They mentioned that when there was a party, they would make sure to invite him. There, they could talk more and perhaps even become friends. They told him it would be a great opportunity. The young man politely thanked them. The fifth princess, still with her head lowered in a sign of respect, heard them say she was not welcome, and that she should always know her place and not get too arrogant. Smiling, they said she needed to be more confident, and her servant, Leximus, asked if the two were princes, and what their problem was. The princess replied that people always said blood was thicker than water. Cyan, entering the conversation, was certain they were not family. They were more like strangers. Whether through blood or water, all of it was meaningless when talking about power. The young man knew that if they were threatening her in such a way, it was because they feared Princess Erin. He consoled the fragile princess, telling her to take control of her own life and not feel lesser. Erin was left speechless and motionless after hearing those words of encouragement. After being out of his quarters all day, he made an announced return. Only little Nana was there, asleep. Cyan was concerned about the whereabouts of Brian and Kirim. The black orb with pink flames informed him it was on its way. It complained about not even being able to take a nap. Its form intrigued the young Vert. It explained that it was better for hiding energy. When asked about being bothered, its master instructed it to find Knight Brian. At first, it was stunned, and shortly after, it became very angry. It was also certain that he would return. When it began using its senses, while arguing with its master, it picked up a scent. It reported to him that it was the smell of blood. This visibly worried Cyan. Meanwhile, Knight Brian was still being tossed around. This was because the eldest son of Duke Louis Mills sought revenge for what had happened days before. With a wicked smile, young Louis Mills said the knight had made him very angry. He thought he was a royal guard, but he realized the man was nothing more than trash. He claimed he would cut his arrogance into pieces and then send it to his master as a gift. He said it was all because his master wanted to play smart, and that wouldn't happen in front of him. He still felt nauseous just remembering that wretch. The knight, even thrown to the ground, still had some fight left in him, and that made the perverse young man even more upset with such audacity. Hearing a mere knight doubt his ability, his eyes filled with fury. He noticed that, even on the ground, the man still had hope in his master. Knight Brian's arrogance bordered on madness, and that young Barrett was unwilling to tolerate. He encouraged his friends to join in the fun, given that the man thought himself so powerful. He urged them all to help finish him off. From the top of a house, Cyan asked what they were doing. The young man, who had been so bold beating up a knight alongside his friends, now fell silent. Directing his words to Barrett, Cyan declared that he was the one behind it all. His knight on the ground, upon recognizing his master, seemed to feel some relief, and from above, it was clear he was in terrible shape. After the initial fear subsided, madness returned to young Louis Mill, who thought of it as a tiger's lair. After making other threats as insane as he was, and after Cyan heard them all, he thought it was fine. It was great that they thought that way. This way, he wouldn't have any remorse in his heart. With that in mind, he unleashed the eighth form of thick mist. His attack was of great magnitude. It struck many of the henchmen the insane young man had hired. The arrogant youth, despite his madness, realized his mercenaries had been defeated. Remembering the first time and the impact caused by his tormentor, when he had merely demonstrated his power. Looking at the ferocity of the young man before him, he couldn't understand how he could be so strong. Even so, he thought he might have a chance and enough strength to harm Cyan Vert. The latter was determined to deliver the harshest of punishments. He gave a preview of what would happen in the next few minutes by merely throwing him with a light blow. That was enough for him to cower near a wall. Cyan saw that Barrett still couldn't learn not to go around exploiting the weaknesses of others. Even cornered, that young aggressor believed he was in the right, and that his hobbies were not public concerns. Cyan remembered that, in his past life, that young man was considered a figure of authority in the kingdom of Garum. He was infamous for his behavioral issues. Assaulting others was the least of what he did. He used to burn live animals for his own entertainment. One day, he went too far. He took the life of a classmate under some flimsy excuse. In the end, there was an order for his purification. It was then that Cyan infiltrated the mansion where he was staying after being expelled. There, he saw countless remains of servants piled up in the basement, all having died in agony. Smiling, Barrett said he didn't mind leaving because he had already had all the fun he wanted. Now, in this life, Cyan looked at him and thought about how, when he dealt with him back then, he hadn't given him even a fraction of what he deserved. This time, he would make up for the number of people Barrett had made suffer. Remembering what he had done to Leximus, Cyan persuaded him to open his mouth. In his hand, he formed a manosphere. Even so, Barrett remained arrogant. When Cyan questioned him, he responded by saying what he would do to him. The boy warned Barrett that he wouldn't be able to escape the consequences of his actions because he was a Louis Mill. Cyan didn't care about the consequences and thought Barrett talked too much. After placing the manosphere in Barrett's mouth, he said he didn't care what he thought of him. Nor did he care about what Barrett said behind his back, saying this while holding his mouth shut to prevent him from spitting it out. He warned Barrett that he shouldn't have laid his filthy hands on his subordinate. After swallowing the manosphere, Barrett didn't seem to hear what was being said to him. He only wanted to get it out. While this scene in the alley unfolded, another person appeared on the rooftop, watching. The observer had no idea Cyan was hiding his powers and thought he had to warn young Haskell immediately. He worried that Cyan could ruin his master's plans. He was thinking this when a hand covered his mouth. Someone had been watching the observer who had been spying on Cyan for days and had now captured him. Meanwhile, Cyan stood in front of his knight, simply watching. He said he was sorry and hadn't expected to be attacked by such a large group. The young men in front of him noticed how badly injured he was, to the point they doubted whether he could really be Cyan's subordinate. Cyan asked why he had gotten into a fight with so many people. When Brian tried to explain, his master asked if this was the loyalty he had sworn. Cyan asked why he didn't run. He said he understood Brian's point but insisted he didn't need to take such risks. He told him he didn't need loyal subordinates who would die and asked him not to do anything so reckless again. Finally, Cyan said the knight would receive some lessons when they returned. After that, he addressed Sarika, asking why she kept hiding and telling her to reveal herself already. His master felt proud, realizing he had noticed her presence. Cyan also picked up on something else. He asked what gift she had brought. She simply tossed the observer, already tied up. That's when her disciple asked if this was the guy who had been stalking him for days. She was also pleased he had noticed. This made her admit once again that he was talented, with powers that surpassed members of the Mist, an intellect that allowed him to negotiate fairly with the headmaster, a mental strength that enabled him to handle the demonic sword perfectly. Combining all this, he was the perfect successor, but this kind of thing couldn't continue. She mentioned that others might find it all too suspicious. Cyan assured her he would be more cautious. He warned her in advance that if anyone laid hands on any of his people again, he wouldn't remain silent. She admired his desire to protect his people. She said she had to go and left everything in his hands. The boy found it unexpected. He thought she would say more, as she loved giving lectures. On her way out, she told him not to forget the little gift. Meanwhile, she would deal with Barrett and his friends. Haskell's personal servant, furious, said he wouldn't reveal anything, even if the worst were done to him. Cyan assured him they wouldn't cross any lines with that boy. The servant also said there was no point trying to interrogate him. He wouldn't say anything. Cyan replied that he didn't need him to because he already knew he was Haskell's #1 subordinate. He remembered all the times he visited his brother and saw this servant at his side. He had even harbored a certain envy for the relationship between the brothers in his past life. That guy might be dangerous in another way. He extended his hand to the young man, knowing he shouldn't eliminate him since he was a subordinate of his older brother. Perhaps he would be very useful to his plans if he managed to dominate someone so close to Haskell. The servant found all that energy strange and asked him to stay away. But it was too late, as the shadow personality magic had already been activated. The mist surrounding the servant now entered his eyes and mouth, as if trying to fill him, and the mist consumed him slowly. Leximus Klein was training with Princess Erin, as she was a skilled swordswoman. She was training with the princess so that both could improve their abilities, as Leximus's talent was remarkable. During the training, using her agility and precision, she quickly secured several victories by exploiting openings in Erin's defense. It was difficult for the princess to win against Leximus, but the two shared a good relationship, so much so that Erin asked to be called by her name when they were alone. While they were training, they noticed that the other two were also giving their best. After the incident with Knight Brian, his master was rigorously training with him, to prevent other incidents like that from happening again. If they did, he would be prepared. Having been inactive for some time, Brian had spent much of his time on other tasks, and his rhythm was slow. Cyan noticed that after extensive training, Brian was gradually regaining his stamina. For someone who was basically a wandering knight, he was already becoming strong again. Cyan knew that soon enough, Brian would be useful. He noticed that Brian was tired, but when asked, he claimed to be fine. Brian said he could keep going even in a difficult state. His master wanted to go easy on him but knew there was nothing stopping people like Barrett from causing trouble. Even tired, Brian was worried about things surrounding his master, such as Kellen. But his master explained that Kellen was now on their side. Brian, however, had his doubts. Cyan recalled the procedure he had to use to ensure that servant Kellen remained loyal to him. It wasn't very difficult to execute. It had been some time since he last used it. It was a 9-star magic of the darkness element, shadow personality. He would create a personality from the shadows to manipulate the opponent. He had only used it once. After cutting the ropes that bound the young man, Cyan asked who he was and learned his name was Kellen Diego. A guardian knight of Velias explained that he was ordered to keep an eye on the young master Cyan, and that was why he had come to Lewin. Cyan, satisfied, noticed that Kellen was already submissive and wanted to know whom he served. Kellen revealed that he had been serving young Master Askel and now desired to serve Master Cyan, if permitted. The young Vert began giving him instructions on what to report to his brother Askel and Velias. He was to pay close attention and leave nothing out. Everything had to be understood and relayed accurately. Kellen affirmed he understood everything, still kneeling with one fist on the ground. While talking to Brian, Cyan recalled Kellen's gaze, brimming with loyalty. As he spoke with Brian, Princess Erin wanted to know if he was always there training. The princess explained that she often went there with Leximus for their training. She thought it was a good idea to continue, especially after what had happened. Cyan knew she was referring to the incident from the previous week, when Barrett was found in front of the infirmary completely out of his mind. Someone had done that to him, but he wouldn't say who had done it, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. He also wouldn't use magic anymore. Leximus's reaction, however, was different from what Cyan expected. He thought she would be pleased, but she just remained quiet, showing no emotion about the situation. Meanwhile, he heard a little voice calling for him. It was Nana, who was hovering slightly above everyone else. When Brian saw her, he was horrified. Cyan was equally alarmed, as he had left her in Kiram's care. However, Kiram was taking her usual nap on the couch. The little draconic human fell right into Princess Erin's arms. She looked at Cyan and said Nana had found her daddy. The 5th princess was a bit confused when she heard the girl call him dad. Immediately, she looked at him as if expecting some sort of explanation. Within seconds, she was already upset, wondering who could be the child's mother. The young Vert just stayed quiet, seeing that the two of them were already judging him. After returning to his quarters, he explained what had happened, and the princess was relieved. She had been thinking the girl was really his daughter, and wondering who the mother could be. She also didn't know he could be kind. That was quite unexpected. His kind knight feared he might be expelled from the academy if anyone found out. The 5th princess told everyone not to worry because she wouldn't tell anyone. Cyan asked if she was serious. She said yes, and Leximus agreed as well. She added that she had no one to talk to since she didn't have any friends. Cyan wanted to know why the 5th princess would keep his secrets. She said she identified with the baby. Both of them understood that the girl wouldn't be accepted by either humans or dragons and would be left alone. She wanted him to take good care of the girl because that was a good thing to do. The princess only had one request. She wanted to visit more often. Cyan asked if she wanted to return to his room. Embarrassed, she told him not to misunderstand. She just wanted to have the right to visit Nana. The boy said he didn't mind, but if she wanted to see her, she'd have to keep the secret. She blushed again, as this was their first little secret together. Cyan said goodbye to them as he was leaving. Leximus was already by the door, waiting for the princess, who was lost in thought, realizing she was now closer to the young man. Kiram was frightened in her sleep. Something so interesting had happened. Cyan was upset with her, as she needed to think about her actions, and he left the girl alone while she slept. The knight suggested she might be stressed from staying inside all the time and suggested a walk. The idea was well received, and they decided to go out for Nana to have some fun. Not far from there, 2 dragons were flying in the skies. One of them, the older one, sensed a strange presence, quickly stopped, and hovered in the air, trying to identify it. Kaolina, the dragon beside him, asked what the problem was. He said he could smell something foul. She mentioned that they weren't too far, but it was in the vicinity of Lewin. If the master wanted to know if she was referring to Lewin Academy, he'd have to wait a bit longer. That disgusting energy was drawing closer, something so vile he could barely tolerate it. Cyan, his knight, and his sword took little Nana for a walk around the outskirts of Lewin. The little one was so happy that she flew up into the sky, while Brian worried it might be dangerous. The young man noticed she seemed to be having fun. They were in a place about 10 kilometers from the center of Lewin. He thought there shouldn't be any problems with her playing as much as she wanted. Kiram, in her black sphere state with pink hair, said he was a magnificent father. The two of them sensed a cruel presence rapidly approaching. The dragon also detected the energy of little Nana and found it utterly repulsive. The knight shouted that it was dangerous when a bolt of electricity tried to hit the little one. The knight quickly threw himself toward the girl to save her. Fortunately, he succeeded. Cyan, sensing the danger, told the two to stay behind him. In front of them were 2 dragons. He wondered why they had to appear there of all places. Worse still, one of the dragons was of a high rank, and neither seemed pleased with the girl's presence. Looking at the child in the knight's arms, they understood the source of the foul smell. Lucian, the high-ranking silver dragon, felt disgusted just by looking at her. Kalina, a high-ranking red dragon, despised the idea of a hybrid creature like her existing. She asked if he was the one responsible for that impure blood and also wielded a demonic sword. The sword didn't take kindly to the way the dragon referred to it. She called it a lesser being that had degraded itself by becoming a slave to humans. Kirim, still in her black sphere state, was displeased. Kalina seemed ready to duel with the arrogant sword, but the dragon's arm stopped her. He said not to worry, he wasn't interested in any of them, and had no intention of fighting inferior beings. All they needed to do was hand over the hybrid, as she was half human and half dragon. She would be worth experimenting on. He would let them go if they handed over that thing. Cyan, with his harsh tone, gave an offensive response to the dragon as a refusal. Lucian, visibly irritated, wanted to confirm what he had heard. The boy, with his peculiar way of speaking, didn't hesitate to yell the same insult again. But this time, he added that the dragon was nothing more than a lizard. The dragon launched an attack, which young Vert dodged quickly. The battle seemed inevitable. Cyan simply told the knight that everything was fine. He just wanted him to leave as quickly as possible and take the girl with him. However, he found the dragon's technique quite sophisticated. The dragon spread his wings, demonstrating his superiority, and wielded a lance. Cyan realized he would have to go all out, and used the 9th form of the dense mist, manifestation of the demonic sword, releasing Kirim's powers so she could better deal with the two dragons. Kalina asked her master what that power was. He replied that it was the power of exile. He thought it was a day full of surprises, yet he was still just an inferior human being. Cyan, sharing his body with Kirim, approached quickly. By the time the dragon noticed, Cyan was already very close. This made the dragon realize that, despite being young, Cyan could attack and evade the dragon's strikes. But this greatly irritated Lucian. He disliked creatures of that race approaching him. Sharing a battle with them was unthinkable. He hated mingling and released his shockwave. To make things a bit more interesting, when he did so, a huge pentagram appeared in the sky, covering a large portion of it, and Cyan was underneath it, where he could easily be struck by multiple electric waves. But using the 3rd form of thick mist, slide, he managed to escape. This also surprised the silver-haired dragon. Then, they used the mist sword rush snowstorm to stop the two dragons. Kalina arrived to provide support for her master, immediately using her fire barrier. She told her master it was okay, that she would block the attacks. However, he urged her to retreat. His disciple said not to worry, as she couldn't lose to just a human. She felt secure because she had placed a dragon barrier made with mana accumulated over thousands of years. To get through it, Cyan used only the 8th technique of the mist sword, fluttering petals. In no time, the dragon's end was determined. He was astonished to see the barrier shattered, even without knowing how it happened and unable to react due to the magnitude of his shock. Cyan simply crossed through and then used a series of dual slashes to slice the dragon apart. His master, the silver dragon, could no longer contain his rage. He asked the human who he was. He claimed that the god of mist held no authority. How could Cyan wield so much power? He demanded that he speak and reveal who he truly was. Then he declared there was no need for an answer anymore, that he had to admit Cyan was a worthy opponent. Cyan noticed that the dragon was about to use polymorphism, and quickly the body that had been that of a man with silver hair and angelic wings was enveloped in light, transforming back into a dragon and abandoning his human form. He returned to his original form, a silver dragon with claws charged with electricity. He began attacking with his strikes and fleeing. However, in that state, Cyan knew very well that he was vulnerable. Without delay, he moved to strike at what he suspected was the dragon's weak point. The dragon noticed Cyan was trying something but couldn't fathom how he might know the weak spot of polymorphism, considering Cyan was just an inferior being. Cyan Vert struck precisely to avoid prolonging the fight any further. The injured dragon knew he needed to flee as quickly as possible, but was told it was already too late. Cyan activated another mist sword technique, unyielding roots of a great tree. His red energy flowed perfectly through his blade, piercing the exact spot needed. The dragon roared as he was struck, now entirely engulfed by the red mist. He was gradually dissolving into it. The knight shouted to his young master. Upon realizing what was happening, he was stunned. The girl in his arms was also watching. When the knight noticed this, he quickly covered the little one's eyes to prevent her from seeing. Cyan was absorbing the dragon and asked if Brian was also serving. The little one, in the knight's arms, commented that she wanted some too, but Cyan, annoyed, said she couldn't. Askel's servant was reporting to him as agreed with his new master, Cyan Vert. He mentioned that the informants they had sent were also eliminated by that force. When Askel asked if that was all, the servant hastened to apologize for the lack of information. Askel noticed a change in his servant, who no longer behaved as he used to. He no longer sensed the desperation Kellen emitted before leaving. He seemed like a different person. Acting wisely, Askell told the servant it was all right but that he had a question for him. Kellen sensed something was different. After hearing that statement, he remained silent, observing. The servant knew it was a test, that Askell was beginning to suspect him. Striking his chest with a closed fist and bowing, he wished for Lumindel's blessing to be with his master. Hearing this, his master appreciated the response and assured him not to take it personally. That was just a standard type of ritual, and he was also told he was dismissed. As he turned to leave, he thought it would be better to be cautious before suspicions reached their peak. Placing his hand on the doorknob, he thought he should clear the path for young Master Cyan. When he opened the door, he came face to face with a woman. She greeted him and recognized her as one of the young master's maids. He asked her why she was there. Askell, placing a hand on his servant's shoulder, explained that he had called her himself. Turning the conversation toward her, he asked if her name was really Emily. The maid confirmed it. With a gentle expression, he asked her for a favor. This left Emily, who was quite naive, very pleased. Elsewhere, they noted the absence of 2 dragons, Lord Lucian and Lady Kalina. They had manifested divine power near Lewin, but that was the last record of them. As they could see, their mana stones were shattered. Such an outcome indicated a significant battle. They suspected that whoever dealt with them must have possessed dark elemental power. They even suspected Kundal Quazel. However, he didn't have dark elemental power, but he was aware of a boy named Cyan Vert, the only user of the dark element at the Royal Academy. There were also rumors that he had survived an encounter with an evil dragon. Perhaps he was involved. The incident involved Renaud Crimson and Zickerman Albus, as both worked for them. They transported test subjects and materials. There might be a connection between them. They needed to keep an eye on this. They considered introducing Lyn of Rainreaver, the granddaughter of the association leader, into Cyan Vert's circle. At the Royal Academy, in one of the royal dormitories, Princess Erin brought a cake for the dragon child. She told Nana to enjoy and savor the cake. The little girl liked the princess. Cyan noticed that even staying there, Nana seemed to be having fun. For this reason, he needed to stay low-key for a while longer. They feared that if the dragons sensed Nana's presence, they might return again. Looking at Leximus, he decided he wouldn't let anyone lay hands on any of them again. He also planned to completely ruin his elder brother's schemes. The 5th princess, looking at young Vert, noticed that he seemed pleased. She asked him what made him so happy. He said it was the memory of a good joke. In the garden of the Vert estate, Askell sat at an outdoor table, receiving a visitor. It was the first prince, Louis Mille Severus. He told his host that it seemed he was doing things the right way. Askell smiled and thanked him, saying it was all thanks to His Majesty, who had helped him greatly. The prince had something important to say. He wanted to know how much longer Askell would remain in that property in the middle of nowhere. He had also heard that their sister Alice had gone on a journey. Askell commented that it was concerning. The prince knew he wasn't truly concerned, just unwilling to let her threaten his position of power. Askell thought it wasn't something they should be discussing. The prince said they were friends and could talk about anything with one another. The prince revealed that their father was interested in the younger brother and was considering a marriage alliance. This upset the prince, to see their father protecting that useless pile of trash he called a daughter. Askell thought he shouldn't act rashly. The more attention she received, the more power she would gain, and that was beneficial for them. The prince appreciated how well they understood each other. When the prince's servant offered Askell more wine, he remarked that he didn't recognize the knight. Louis Mille Severus explained that he was a gem he had found while exploring the slums. Upon closely examining the knight, Askell found him to be the strangest gem. The knight introduced himself as Boris Laum. 2 years passed. Alice tried to be as discreet as possible and adapt to academic life. She had finally returned. The first place she visited was the academy, as it had been a long time since she had seen the headmaster. As soon as Kunda laid eyes on her, he asked if she had enjoyed her adventures. Proudly, she said she had visited Furna. He knew that was a place where humans were not welcome. Alice explained that it had actually taken her a year to adjust, but she wanted to discover the meaning of harmony. Since the headmaster had mentioned that the place hindered her growth, she felt she needed to find out for herself. Hearing the words of the young Miss Vert, he didn't seem too pleased. She explained that she wanted to join the Knights of Light. He understood that she intended to continue following the will of her family. She said she was worried about her siblings, especially Cyan. Because he was very shy, the rector couldn't bear to hear such words and began to laugh. She found it strange. To him, the idea of Cyan being shy was a joke. Soon after, the young man arrived, saying that talking about him like that was mean. Alice was very happy to see her brother, and noticed how tall he had grown. So much so that she was speechless at how much he had changed. Cyan had missed his sister greatly and made that clear to her. While walking with him, she noticed how much he had changed, especially in stature. He was already the same height as her, and she believed he would grow even taller soon. He joked, saying he thought she had shrunk. July 2nd, 988. He remembered that date from his past life. It was the last time he saw his sister alive. She asked if he wouldn't go home since it was already summer vacation. That's when he told her that no one would welcome him there. She felt sad hearing that. That's why he hadn't gone back for the last 2 years. He thought there were a few other reasons for this. One of them was Askell being there. Not to mention that the Duke's wife would be waiting for a chance to take revenge, and his father would do nothing. To him, returning to that place would be the beginning of the end. He probably wouldn't return to the academy anymore. Alice asked if he and Krantz had become good friends. She heard from her brother that this would never be possible. Even so, she wanted an explanation. Her brother said she knew very well since he had already tried to eliminate him before. She widened her eyes and asked him to explain. The knight who was with them said he could test it. Alice was startled. She hadn't noticed the young man's presence. Cyan explained that he was his guard knight. She found it strange that he had a guard knight. She noticed he was being pursued but didn't know why. She was upset because the place where she stayed was completely isolated. She took note of who the bad people were. Krantz and the Duke's wife. She made such an angry face that he had only seen it on his sister once before. He called her by name to see if she would get mad because she seemed very upset. That's when she asked if he had told anyone. Annoyed, he said there was no one to tell. Cyan tried to calm her, saying that Krantz was already reflecting on his actions. Alice suddenly jumped to hug her brother, saying he didn't need to keep everything to himself. She told him he could rely on her sometimes. She said she would protect him from that moment on. She wanted to stay with him a little longer, but she had another place to go. She asked him to take care of himself. The scene of the two united siblings left the knight emotional. Soon after, he also received a strong hug from Miss Alice, who asked him to take care of her brother. Although she was the one who initiated the hug, Cyan looked at his knight with malicious eyes. When it was time for her to leave, he said goodbye and realized that it had been a long time since the last time he had been so angry. He still remembered the day he was dueling Krantz, who, even after winning, continued to torment his half-brother. Krantz ordered him to get up, even as he yelled that he had already lost, and begged him to stop. Even so, he struck him once more with the hilt of his sword on his face and kept hitting him, until a voice silenced him and made him tremble with fear. It was Miss Alice, who asked what he was doing. Malicious Eyes ordered him to apologize immediately. He knew that the Duke's house would soon be in chaos. She needed to know the truth about her family, so she could protect herself and somehow change that fateful future. The knight handed 2 envelopes to the young master, who asked where he had gotten them. He explained that one came from the academy, and the other was handed over by a janitor. He noticed that the janitor had delivered the black envelope with no external markings. Brian asked if he wouldn't keep the other one, and said it probably came from that place. Or perhaps the knight noticed it bore the imperial family's seal. Kirim wanted to know what it was about, and the knight wondered who could have sent it. Cyan knew they held a banquet around that time of year. The other one, he knew, was a purification order, as it was encoded, and only he could know what it was about. He would have to purify Drini and Nephews. He remembered it being a major incident during the banquet. Since he was the younger brother of the current empress, it was also a significant shock. Kirim asked if he would go. He said yes because he had business to attend to. However, upon stopping to think, it was someone else who had completed that mission in the past life. He thought the master might like him. Kirim, to tease him, joked that the other person was Princess Erin. He kept teasing him, saying it was a love letter. He decided to join in the joke, using the restriction of the demonic sword, which made the silly sword fall face first onto the ground. Then he asked his knight to make the preparations. Meanwhile, he heard little Nana asking for food. When Brian looked in her direction, he was extremely startled. The young master asked what was wrong. His eyes also landed on what should have been the little girl, who now appeared to be in her youth. However, she still had childish habits, like dragging her plush dragon around. Quickly, Lady Alice returned to Vert Mansion. She was well received, as always. She passed swiftly through all the servants, as she needed to speak urgently with the Duchess. The Duchess, in turn, was sitting after having tea, engrossed in a book. When Alice arrived abruptly, she found it strange. Nevertheless, she greeted her. She told her it had been a long time since she had the audacity to be called daughter. However, Alice immediately raised her hand and slapped her across the face. After slapping the Duchess, the servants rushed to understand what was happening. The Duchess asked if the girl had gone mad. Alice wasn't in the mood for conversation and wanted explanations. She demanded that the Duchess explain why she had tried to eliminate Cyan. The Duchess, very angry, wondered how Alice could have found out. Then she said there was no proof against her. This confirmed to Alice that it was her because only the guilty would demand evidence. She then asked how she dared to raise her hand against her and make baseless accusations. The Duchess yelled for her guards, asking what they were doing and ordering them to remove the girl. They approached Lady Alice and tried to take her away. Alice stared each of them in the eyes and began challenging them. Far more agile and skilled than any of them, she quickly defeated them one by one. She then summoned the elemental spirit Undine, forcing them all to back away from her. Margareth was amazed at what the girl could do with her spiritual magic. Alice approached and stated that Cyan's guard knight had already revealed everything. She explained that it was the Duchess who had tried to make her younger brother disappear 2 years ago. The Duchess yelled, claiming Alice couldn't trust the words of such a lowly being. Telling the Duchess to shut up, Alice said she would tell their father everything and that she'd better prepare herself. For her, it was all over. Very angry, Alice left, leaving the guards struggling to get up from the floor. Margareth thought the girl was very naive. She still wasn't aware, after all she had been through. The Duke Villiers cared about nothing else besides that child. Margareth realized this when reporting to her father, who already knew Cyan had faced such an attempt. However, he didn't care. She couldn't believe he was turning his back on his own son. Her father even said he had no intention of making excuses. He thought it was fine since Cyan was safe. When Alice mentioned that the knight had saved her brother, he had to explain Cyan's strength. That's when she understood what her father was trying to say, that it was Cyan who had defeated them all. Walking around his desk and approaching his daughter, he told her she still didn't know her brother. He handed her an envelope, saying it was an invitation from the imperial family for a banquet. He instructed her to attend in his place, relax a little, and stop worrying so much about her brother. He added that the boy was stronger than she thought. He also mentioned he'd be returning to the camps. She stood holding the banquet invitation, perplexed by everything her father had said. In the corridors, she wondered how her father could act that way when Cyan was only 13 years old. She then ran into an old friend, someone she hadn't seen in a long time. It made Alice happy. It was obvious how delighted she was to see her friend Cecilia. Cecilia greeted Lady Alice warmly, welcoming her. The two quickly embraced, and Cecilia asked where she had been all this time. She also mentioned being upset for not even receiving a letter about her whereabouts. Cecilia was a high-ranking knight of the Knights of Light. She was a close confidant of the professor and a friend. Alice asked her to calm down, saying they were heading for new horizons. Cecilia wanted to know what she meant. Smiling, he told her that the two of them would go to the Imperial Palace and showed her the invitation their father had given her. Elsewhere, the carriage was on its way to the Royal Palace. Inside it was Nana, who got excited at every new sight she saw along the road. Upon seeing a servant, she couldn't contain herself, letting her wings, horns, and tail become visible. Cyan had to scold her, asking her to hide her tail again. She was upset because every time she got too excited, she lost control, and parts of her body would reappear. He was trying to get her to hide the parts of her body that revealed she was a dragon. He thought this would make traveling with her safer. They were teaching her to look like a servant so as not to raise suspicion. She was already dressed as one, but she also needed to act like a servant of Cyan Vert. Even though she practiced and seemed to be doing well, he worried she might cause some trouble. As he was lost in thought, he sensed a faint energy. However, it didn't belong in that place. He asked his knight what the issue was. Sternly, he replied that it was some road bandits. They were ahead, surrounding the carriage, and all of them carried pieces of metal. They demanded everything they had, showing hostility. Cyan tasked his knight with dealing with them since it wasn't a big deal. Nana wanted to know what was happening outside the carriage. Cyan told her it was nothing serious, just a few pests, and that now, with the training he had received, the knight Brian would be able to handle that fight, even against multiple thugs, effectively. They all tried attacking at the same time to confuse him and gain a numerical advantage. He just took a deep breath, feeling more confident now, and used multiple cuts, his skill. He quickly dealt with the nuisance, thinking he was no longer weak, because he had grown stronger and left the old Brian behind. Cyan asked him to stop getting so excited, and they resumed their journey with the carriage. Meanwhile, the count of attendees for the banquet continued. That year, there were more attendees than usual. They thought it might be better to delay the missed plans. But the master didn't think so. The purification needed to happen as soon as possible. The person speaking with her asked if there was something special about this purification. Sarika explained that it was about a man who harmed married women. There was also the fact that this wrongdoer was her fiancé. Looking at the guest list, she noticed someone with great potential. This person was a rare genius who had all elemental statuses at 20%. However, she couldn't attend many classes because of her frail body. She was the granddaughter of the head of the Garam Mage Association. It was concerning because that child had never appeared in society and suddenly wanted to attend the banquet. The assistant heard that the president of the association had asked her to attend. Sarika feared he was planning something and had a bad feeling about it. The night Cyan and the girl were walking carefully through the streets of the Garam Empire. Without paying attention, they suddenly bumped into someone walking down the street. The young man looked at Nana and told her to watch where she was going. She apologized. She asked what she could do to make up for it. Smiling, the young man told her not to worry, that it was fine. Then, pointing to the young man, she shouted to her father that the people here were very kind. However, he remembered that she didn't know much about the world, so he needed to be more careful with her. Brian was startled when he saw Nana's eyes, and Cyan, seeing them, was also alarmed. She was hungry, and her pupils had returned to their normal state, revealing who she was. She was also emitting a strong aura with dragon eyes and was asking her father for food. He was worried that she might be discovered at any moment. He ordered Brian to take her immediately to a restaurant as quickly as possible. He thought all the commotion was because she was hungry, and that wasn't good. They found a restaurant that served plenty of food, and she was finally satisfied. After consuming several portions, Cyan thought it was a good thing he had brought plenty of money. He knew taking care of a child wouldn't be easy, yet he couldn't ignore a strange man of presence. A young woman approached the table where they were sitting and, speaking to Cyan, said it was a pleasure to meet him. She confirmed his name was Cyan Vert. After that, she stared at him for a long time without saying anything. Cyan was surprised that this strange girl knew his name. Immediately after, she asked if he minded her sitting next to him. However, she was already seated. He wanted to know her name. She still hadn't answered, and then she said her name was Lunev. She mentioned that she was attending the academy with him and was in the second year. He shared his lack of interest. She didn't mind because she thought no one could compare to someone as popular as him. Nana asked Brian if that person was a friend of her dad's. He didn't know either but thought not. Then the girl mentioned that the guardian knight and the maid were quite close to him. He commented that there was no reason for them to eat at separate tables. She noticed he was very kind. Cyan didn't like being complimented out of the blue. He wanted to know why she was approaching him. She asked if he had come to the capital because of the banquet, and he admitted that he had. How did she know that? She said there couldn't be another reason for him to be there, as he rarely went out. She was pleased to meet him and looked forward to seeing him again at the banquet, as she was also invited. He realized that since she had received a letter, she must also be a noble. She told him she had to leave and that it was a pity since she wanted to stay a little longer. As she left, she asked him to kindly remember her. Turning around, she shared her full name. It was Lunev Rainreaver. When she said her name, he remembered she was the granddaughter of the president of the Mage Association. So, the crazy old man had sent her. In his past life, the girl had died young while at the academy. He wasn't sure if it was because of her frailty or the many experiments conducted at the association. He noticed the present was changing, creating a different future. Preparing for the event later was the fifth princess, who had been spending quite some time trying on outfits and combinations. Leximus couldn't bear to see her constantly changing her attire in search of the ideal one. They were on that desperate journey together. When Leximus commented that young Cyan would like whatever outfit she chose, she pretended not to understand, even though she was the one who had sent him the invitation. That's when a servant entered. With her was a box that the princess's older brother had ordered to be delivered. It was a beautiful necklace that he wanted her to accept as a gift and wear that evening. Leximus said it would look lovely and that young Cyan would like it very much too. The event had started. Many people were filling the ballroom, figures and names with their guardian knights. Cyan noticed the room was very crowded. However, he still hadn't seen the target he wanted to speak with. Kellen, seeing him, assumed Askell was nearby. The informant confirmed he was and was with Louis Mill at that moment, but needed to tell him something first. He said Cyan should leave before the banquet. Cyan thought there might be a leak in the purification mission. The informant continued, saying that Cyan and others might be in danger. He concluded this after Askell ordered him to leave before the banquet began. He mentioned that Askell had prepared a little event. That's when Cyan realized who the culprit was. His servant also informed him that he couldn't bear to see him hurt. Cyan reassured him and dismissed him. Still, the servant asked if he'd be okay. Cyan insisted he leave, as he was in danger. His servant turned his back and obeyed the order. Now it was clear who had done everything in the past. He discovered his brother was crazier than he had imagined. Kiram fought for his interest in saving innocent people who might get hurt. She was beginning to understand what was going on in his mind. Cyan thought resolving this was more important than the mission, so it would have to be postponed. Using his psychological influence, he began speaking mentally with his master. He explained that he thought it necessary to postpone the purification mission and had just received information. Curious, she wanted to know what it was about. He told her the banquet hall was about to become a tragedy. He didn't have time for details at the moment. He needed to check if there were monsters nearby. She wanted to know if he was sure the information was reliable. He said he knew very well the person behind all of it. He told her not to worry, her fiancé would be eliminated too. She thought he didn't know they were engaged. He turned away, as he had work to do. When he was telling her it was better for her to explain herself, he heard a familiar voice calling her name. Turning around, he saw it was Alice. A chill ran down his spine, and he asked what she was doing there. She said she was there for a change of scenery. It was all terrible. He feared she would get caught up in the incident. That's when her fiancé also appeared, as if she wasn't already concerned enough. Everything was turning into a mess, and the groom introduced himself to Miss Alice. He was already looking with those predator eyes. In another corner, Cyan was asking Brian to do something. He was quite confident. He noticed that he was happy. He thought it might be because he had proven that the dragon's liquid had indeed remained. When asked what it was like to inspect the palace's underground passages, he was quick to say that the place was dark. Then he noticed that he wasn't excited enough. Even so, he told him to go quickly because he had his reasons. Brian, seeing someone spying on his master, said to be careful because someone was there. A suspicious person was staring at him. It was only then that Cyan noticed her presence. He saw that Brian had already moved to resolve it. He jumped on poor Emily and threw her to the ground. Cyan told him that it was all right. She was an acquaintance. The knight stopped, apologized, and felt sorry. A hooded man, acting suspiciously, descended the stairs and, after reaching a place, commented that it was time for his subordinates to act and asked everyone to rise. What appeared to be several hooded beasts. Princess Erin was already in the hall looking for Cyan. There were many people, but she couldn't find him. She was upset because she had made a point of inviting him, but he seemed to be nowhere. She thought it was a pity, still touching the necklace her younger brother had given her as a gift. Someone approached her and said it was an honor to meet the princess. She immediately recognized who it was. It was Lune of Rainreaver, a second-year student at the academy. She was happy to know that the princess still remembered her and was honored. Happily, the princess commented that she wouldn't forget the genius of the Garum Kingdom. Demonstrating her kindness, she said that she was hosting the banquet on behalf of the empire, and the two continued talking. Then, the girl mentioned Cyan's name, saying that he would also like to be received like that. The fifth princess showed interest in the conversation and asked how she knew Cyan. The girl said that she had met him. The princess wanted to know if the two were close, but she only thought out loud. After that moment of embarrassment, Lunev said that it was as expected. The princess was in love. Hearing those words, Erin blushed. She didn't even know she liked him. Quickly, everything turned into turmoil and people started screaming. Huge beasts were invading the banquet. All they could hear were people screaming for help and calling for the guards. The princess thought it was impossible for such a monster to be there, and wondered how it had entered the palace. There didn't seem to be many guards to help so many guests. However, they seemed to have a certain bad omen. They were warning the fifth princess. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Nana, pretending to be Cyan's maid, was greeting Emily, who couldn't bear the shock and imagined that she might be being replaced. It was so absurd that she fell back and thought that the girl who had replaced her was cuter than her. Emily asked the young master if he had replaced her with that girl. Cyan wanted her to answer whether it was indeed Askell who had asked her to go to that banquet. She replied that yes, he wanted it so much that he even offered her a job. Cyan didn't like hearing those words. Emily continued saying that Askell wanted her to work for him as a maid, at least once, since the brother was away at the academy, and she seemed very sad and lonely. She said she refused because she needed to make sure to be present when the master returned. She said that even so, he took her to the banquet, so she thought he hadn't given up. After hearing everything, he asked Brian to keep an eye on Emily and Nana. As he was leaving, he needed to take care of some things. He wasn't there in his past life. He realized that since he discovered that spy, he knew he was planning something. He became furious thinking that he could lay hands on his people. As soon as he left, Emily remembered that she had to deliver a bow tie that Askell had sent. She had gone there especially to deliver it, but after getting emotional, she ended up forgetting. Nana smelled a different scent that emanated from that red bow tie. Suddenly, her pupils changed. In another secure room, Askell commented that everything had begun and the prince was happy. The prince commented that Askell had worked hard for that day to come. He thought that the gift should be being delivered, and also thought that the new knight, Boris, was being useful. The prince commented that he would still make much use of him. The empire didn't need to be full of peace. In fact, they just needed to show them who the empire needed. The prince turned out to be worse than Askell. Meanwhile, the fifth princess was trying with all her might to help people get out of there. Lunev asked the princess to also leave, but she was determined to take care of others first. Then the girl said she would help the princess, and thanked her new friend for her assistance. Meanwhile, those monsters charged at the few guards who were present. The captain looked back and noticed that more of them were coming. Everyone was shocked by all that was happening. The guards, along with the captain, were about to lose hope. They had seen high-level demonic beasts before, like mandrakes. They didn't know why giant monsters, which would only be seen on the front lines, were there. Crying, they thought there was nothing else to do, they would all perish. That was when an energy made the beast back away from them. It was Sarika, the academy instructor. After doing that, Sarika asked the guards to use that time to help people get out. Seeing a glimmer of hope, he was reinvigorated and asked his soldiers to help. Someone else was also fighting and trying to protect as many people as possible. It was Miss Alice. She wielded her swift sword and said she would also help as many people as possible. The captain ordered people to keep leaving. Now, the two of them were trying to fight against that mandrake. However, that monster had a target. It passed by the two, dodging them, and they realized who its target was. The demonic creature was letting the princess know that its target, from the beginning, was her. Upon looking back and noticing, she was terrified. Instructor Sarika shouted for them to take care of her. Before she could be hit, the captain came to her defense, cutting off one of the mandrake's branches. He shouted for them to protect the princess at all costs. She, however, remained motionless when she realized that she was the target. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.